Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. I'm your host, Andy Nolch, and it's lovely to be here listening to the good old stories. This is the podcast that has everything to do with Scientology. Yes, that interesting religion you might have heard about, that deeply thinking religion you might have thought about, because this isn't just about sipping wines and looking at beaches. This is about thought. It sends you on an adventure. It exercises your mind. It's a lot of effort. If you like this podcast, make sure you subscribe to it. Hey, look, if you don't know what Scientology is, then I recommend listening to the first few episodes of this podcast. They answer some of your special questions. Some of those things that you want to know about Scientology where you're like, what the hell is Scientology? Because you know what? Some people can study Scientology their whole life and they don't even know what it is. Talk about complex. How did you like the last show with Scott Gordon? It was pretty exciting. I enjoyed it. And guess what? It's back again for part 2. Oh! It's now time to go down the rabbit hole, go down into that funky world of Scientology where up is down, down is up, left is right, right is left. What you thought wasn't possible is possible. This is all about mission is possible. Welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. I'm your host, Andy Nolch, and today's show is, like I said, it's with Scott Gordon, the Indie Auditor. There's something on my mind, and it's Mandela Effect. I just want to quickly mention it because it's so epic. I don't want to say anything more about it. You just got to look it up. Look into it on the internet. You can spend hours and hours forever looking into it. But do you remember the movie Wizard of Oz where the evil monkey things go flying and the evil witch says, "Fly, fly, my pretties," and like sends the monkeys away? Well, apparently, if you watch the movie and you find copies of it and you find copies of the script, it now says. That scene says, when she's talking to the monkeys, it just says, "Fly, fly, fly." And there's no, "Fly, my pretties." It doesn't exist anymore. "Fly, my pretties" doesn't exist. And it never was that. It was now suddenly, in this reality that we're in, it was "Fly, fly, fly." Seriously look it up. How bizarre is that? And there's heaps of other Mandela effects, things that have changed. Like in the movie Darth Vader, where the famous line, "Luke, I am your father." It's now just, "No, I am your father." What's the deal with that? That line as well has changed, and it never was, "Luke, I am your father." This sort of stuff is bizarre, but it's really happening. We are living in a world where you can wake up and suddenly Hitler had blonde hair. Now, we all know Hitler has brown hair. It's documented in history and everything. But imagine if you woke up and you checked history books, you asked people, and suddenly Hitler had blonde hair. How tripped would that be? Well, that is the world we're living in. That can happen. The Mandela Effect talks about this. And there are cases time and time again where stuff has just changed. I swear that movie was "Fly, my pretties, fly." And there's heaps of other things. I swear it was "Luke, I am your father." There's so many other things that have changed. And no one knows what it is. No one understands it. I don't understand it. It's just like, whoa. The really cool thing about it is that if there's something you didn't like about this reality, just think about this. You can wake up tomorrow and that thing can be gone, or it can be changed to something good that you wanted it to be good. And your problem's solved. Imagine you woke up tomorrow and there's just everything's made of gold or something. It's epic. This sort of stuff is really going on, and I respect the people who are willing to listen to this podcast and my Scientology videos, because you people aren't just giving up on life. You aren't just seeing that a movie line has changed and then going, oh, I don't understand it. Or you aren't just reading a post on Facebook and going, this is too complex to understand. I'm going to ignore it and just watch sport and drink wine and eat pizzas and stuff and I guess have sex, because I think a lot of guys get obsessed with that. So you're choosing to go on, like you're choosing to just not, basically outpoints. There's outpoints in life. And I was onto them from like age 18 onwards. I was like, hold on a second, these are big outpoints. Whereas other people just ignore these outpoints. They don't happen, the outpoints happen like once every 3 months. Something epic happens, like a psychic actually predicts something, and you just go, well, that was a coincidence, and you just pass it off. But I was willing to go, hold on a second. I think we the world isn't what I thought it was. And then I found out more and more and more and more and realized that, yeah, it really wasn't. But a lot of people just ignore these outpoints and just pretend like the whole theory of evolution happened and we're just on a spinning ball and there's nothing more to life going on or anything. By the way, that spinning ball wasn't a reference to the whole flat earth thing. I don't believe in flat earth at all. But yeah, it's just interesting, you know? Check out the Mandela effect. I mean, it was scary when I found it out. And I've never hit the internet as hard as what I hit the internet for like a 2-day period when I found out about the Mandela effect. I was like, whoa, because I was onto it. I remember the TV show Sex in the City? Well, I remember when suddenly I'd see ads on the TV for Sex and the City, and I was like, hold on a second. I thought it was Sex in the City, and then I just thought they'd changed the name for marketing reasons. And then you look into it and it's a Mandela effect. Apparently, it was always Sex and the City. It didn't get changed for marketing effects. It was just always Sex and the City. And you can't mess with my mind. You got a switched on cookie here. I remember it was Sex in the City. Serious. And I know other people who remember it being Sex in the City. It's epic what's going on. It's amazing. It's finding out the truth about reality. Hey, if anyone's got any good Scientology news, particularly independent Scientology, or independent Scientology wins, or good Facebook posts about Scientology, remember you can always just email me at andynolch@hotmail.com, and I might be able to put it into the podcast. So, in Scientology news, the Theta Alliance Summit, aka Free Zone Convention, has occurred. So if anyone was thinking of going to this year's, you've already missed out. Bad luck. But there's always next year, which is cool. Apparently, it was a great event, and I have here a success story from it from Judy H., who was an attendee. There aren't enough words in my universe to describe how thankful and grateful I am for all of you. You are the essence of the family I wanted to create when I first heard of Scientology in 1969. This year, the summit was the absolute best. From the time you came out and told us you loved us until the very end. I think that's referring to Ray Robles, who was running the event. I knew you loved us. I felt it, and we love you back. Thank you for all you have given us through the years. And now we get to continue with your remarkable daughter and her husband, Brody. I had a life-changing win this time. All my life, I've lived in confusion. Even while in Scientology in the church, I always felt there was suppression in my life, but couldn't pinpoint the source. Was it my husband, my father, my mother, my daughter, or was I suppressing myself and others? Now I know with full certainty who and what a suppressive is, and they are not in their own valence. I am able to spot the source and realize the difference. Wow. I keep having cognitions and more realizations every day. Thank you so much. Well, so that was a success story from the summit. I'm looking forward to going. I haven't been to one yet, and I reckon it sounds pretty awesome. And if you want to see some of the old Free Zone conventions, you can just search it in YouTube or go to Ray Robles' YouTube channel, and they've got some videos of the past conventions, which is great listening. Now, here is an interesting Facebook post. It's by Belkis Yesti, and I don't know who this person is. And it's kind of relates to what I talked to Scott Gordon in this podcast about. So it's kind of a good post. So let's have a listen to this. This is your basic SP. He is not basically good even though he has a human body. You can order him until the end of time and he will still be basically evil. A spiritual being, but unlike most of mankind, which is basically good. There are many like him, but they are not outwardly open about being SPs. In other interviews, he tells you he feels he is a god. So here you have this man who is powerful enough to do what he wants to this planet, and simultaneously, it's all evil. Superpower plus evil does not equal OT. It equals Darth Vader. Reference to George Soros. So that's kind of interesting, and that's something that I've sort of thought about as well. This idea that some people aren't basically good. And I know LRH says man is basically good, but what if there are some things out there that appear to be man, but they're not actually man? Or what is man basically good? Like when Hubbard says man's basically good, maybe he's not elaborating on that statement. It's like saying, like you can say a statement like man is basically good, and I go, yeah, like my, cousins are basically good, and there are heaps of people who are basically good, but there might be a really tiny percentage of the population that actually aren't basically good and actually evil, like naturally. But it's just the majority of man might be doing wrong actions and sometimes doing evil things, but they actually are basically good. And Hubbard's saying, hey, realize that man's basically a good thing. But he didn't elaborate on it and mention that there are some beings that are actually full-blown evil. I don't know. Or maybe it's just that the bank really is that strong and that, man, there are some men out there who have been twisted and become evil because of their banks. And their banks are so strong that you almost can't reverse them around. I don't know, but when... I don't know. I don't quite trust this whole man is basically good statement that Hubbard says. I feel like Hubbard didn't elaborate on that. A part of me feels like I've got the deep knowingness that it's just like, no, there are some beings out there that have been created evil from the beginning. And the more you order them, the more successful they will and the more happier they will become in harming people and screwing up the world. But anyway, I love to see a specific Hubbard thing on where he elaborates on and it actually handles the point on, are there beings out there that are not basically good and are actually born evil? I'd like to hear if he says that. Anyway, we've got to hear an independent Scientology win of the week. And it's by Michael Moore, and he said, I thought an OT success story might be good here. Since doing the OT levels, one of the wins I have is the ability to postulate a parking space whenever I want one. This might seem a small win, but in fact, when you go to a shopping centre and people are almost literally fighting for parking spots, the ability to simply locate one with no comm lag and just slide right in there is immensely satisfying. On the way, or even a day before, I will simply postulate and mock up the parking spot, and it is there when I arrive. This is using one's abilities in real time in the physical universe. There are others, of course, but I do enjoy the convenience of this one. My wife used to be continually surprised by this, but now accepts it as a matter of course and even expects it. Yeah, that sounds like a very, I think a lot of Scientologists have that win. Basically, I think I've had similar things in that before you found out about postulating how your thoughts can create reality, you don't do these sorts of things, And then when you start actually thinking positive and making these things happen and realizing you can do it. Like I know a guy who is a sire and he doesn't use a watch because he can literally know what time it is. He'd use it off his knowingness. Like he's very accurate with it. He's just gotten used to using his theta ability, which is so apparently we're thetans that know everything, right? So he's got in the habit of literally just knowing time without having to check devices. It's really interesting because we've all got this ability, and I think Hubbard mentions this as one of our perceptions. It's called a perception of time, and we've just ignored it and been used to using watches, but it really exists out there. Literally, you can work on it till you just actually know what time it is. And I know I do it a lot as well. Accidentally, I'll guess the time and I'll find it's actually correct. So imagine if I actually worked on it like this other guy and got into a habit of it. I'll just know what time it is. It's a lot easier living life that way. These are sorts of things that non-Scientologists don't do. But imagine just being able to have car parks whenever you go anywhere and just knowing what time it is without having a watch. It's just handy, you know? All right. You want to hear a Scientology joke? All right, let's listen to this one, okay? 2 Scientologists in a kayak were chilly, so they lit a fire in the craft. It sank, proving once again that you can't have your kayak and eat it too. And heat it too. Yeah. I almost think that was at the level where I don't even know if that even classifies as a joke. This book really pushes it for Scientology jokes. It's really terrible. Absolute shocker. It's now time for the interview, but before that, I want to mention that if you're interested in trying Scientology, there's a group called Ronzorg that I think is pretty good for trying out Scientology, and there's lots of them in Europe in particular, so you could just Google Ronzorg Scientology and find out how to get into doing some Scientology. There's also a group called the Association of Professional Independent Auditors, and you can go there and become a member and find out through that group how to get your nearest auditor and try some Scientology, and I really recommend it. So in this interview with Scott Gordon, it's part 2. It's not as wild, I think, as part 1, because Scott Gordon sort of caught me by surprise. I didn't know what to expect with the first interview, but this one's a bit more structured. It's a bit wild, that first one. I liked it a lot, actually. This one's even longer, this part 2. And we discuss Christianity, squirreling, the CIA, what makes a good auditor, and much, much more. This is a long one, this interview, and I think the discussion of what makes a good auditor, I think that's pretty important. I think we hit the nail on the head into the reasons as to why the auditors in the church aren't that good and won't really set you free if you go to them. Anyway, so let's check out this interview, part 2 with Scott Gordon. All right, it's now time for part 2 of my interview with Scott Gordon, the former DSA, Director of Special Affairs, the independent auditor. Are you there, Scott Gordon?
Yes, thank you, Andy.
Great. It's good to get back to chatting with you. I've got a lot of questions still to ask you, and let's just get this all done. Let's get this one big interview. I don't know how long this is going to go for, but let's see.
Okay, we're ready.
Yep. So you mentioned you're a Christian Scientologist. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I was raised a Christian. My parents were actually part of a missionary translating team, and my dad was stationed in the States, in Montana, on the Crow Indian Reservation, doing a translation of the Bible for the Crow Indians. So I actually grew up on the reservation. We would sometimes tour around the country to see relatives and to also visit churches who were supporting us. So I got a very broad spectrum of all different Protestant Christian denominations growing up. And that was my faith and religion as I grew up. So I've read the Bible in its entirety. Oddly enough, that was a OSA requirement. Don't ask me why, but they wanted us to all the DSAs to read the Bible. And I think I did that in 2001 or 2002. Maybe 2000. I read the entire Bible. And so in my youth and early or late teens, I was a Christian as my professed religion, yes.
Wow, yeah, it's pretty interesting because it's like I would call myself a Christian Scientologist as well, because I believe that there is a force of evil out there and there is a force of good, and that with sort of prayer and I guess following some of the things that what Jesus said. You can connect with the force of good and get benefit from that. Do you believe in that?
Yeah, actually, and when I say I was a Christian, I was having a hard time being a Christian because I was embarrassed and ashamed, and I didn't see the point in it. And compared to the mainstream society, it felt like I was in a kind of cult, and I was sheltered from things that I wanted to explore more. Now, as I grew older, I came to appreciate that because, a life of morality is not a bad thing. In fact, immorality can actually dampen your awareness and cause a lot of problems. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about how Scientology connected to Christianity in the beginning. When I first joined staff, I went off to finish my college degree because that was part of my agreement when I signed up. And I came back from that, and I had my first confessional, which they called a returning from leave sec check for a staff member. And I think confessionals are overdone in the church, especially on staff. But this is my first one, and it was my first opportunity to really dig in and explore some things in myself and have to fess up to some things that I didn't think were, completely right about my life and my lifestyle. And by the time I finished the sec check, I had a very good result. I was very happy with it. And there were two results of that. Number one, I was no longer ashamed to call myself a Scientologist, which I had been. And number two, I felt like I could actually practice Christian morality without any effort and be happy with it and sort of like feel that I was a Christian amongst my family and friends that were Christians and not have like what we called in Scientology the withhold phenomena of, well, I can't really call myself a Christian because I smoked a joint here, I had a drink there, I had these wild fantasies there. So it's like after my sec check, I really felt whole again. I really felt like I no longer had that shyness. I no longer had that resistance or lack of confidence, let's say, that caused me to be kind of ashamed of either calling myself a Scientologist or a Christian.
Yeah, that's interesting because I had a similar win from when I did my sec check as well, in that it like got me to confront things that the church thought were wrong with me, and it made me more confident that they weren't wrong and more confident in just being myself and holding my ground more. That's what I found.
Yeah, me too. So that was a very nice result. It was is kind of like a turning of a corner in my life where I could actually reach out more, develop myself more, be less shy and less reserved, and start to really succeed in life where I wasn't before.
Yeah. It's I've got a quote here from your website, and it says, "Only then could I come to assume my present position, which neither aligns with Hubbard's church nor Hubbard's devoted independence." What do you mean by that?
For some reason, I'm not connecting exactly with the quote where you got it, but if you're talking about my Free Scientology project or my attitude towards Scientology, I'm kind of accepting of Hubbard Scientology and standard tech with reservations. I see it work where people are very disciplined and ethical about applying it. And I also see that it puts a big limit on development of the tech. And also, Hubbard and his background, there's a little bit in that I see as an attempt to distance myself from following Hubbard completely. Whereas now I use Hubbard as a reference, as somebody I respect as a researcher who did a lot of hard work and who knew more about the mind than just about anyone when it came to applying philosophy to the mind and getting things handled that you want handled in your life. There's, a lot of that technology is not really in use much, or it's out of reach in the church because it requires highly classed auditors who almost never get trained that high before they rewind and go back and retrain everybody. So there's a lot of really cool things in Scientology that not even the church is using. So, and there's also a lot of cool things that have been presented by tech developers such as John McMaster or Jack Horner, who worked with Hubbard and presented their ideas after they got expelled and declared. And those ideas are very helpful and very valid as well. So I try not to restrict myself to Hubbard standard technology, but at the same time, I'm also a student of that, and I want to be able to deliver that to those who ask me for it. If someone comes to me for Hubbard standard technology, I take pride in delivering that as standard as I can.
Well, let's say if someone went to you and they want to go clear, would you be doing squirrel stuff to get that person clear, or will you just follow pure Hubbard?
I don't see any reason to do anything but Hubbard Scientology up through the state of clear for somebody who wants that, and I know that that you can go clear on that. The only little things that I might do with people who are open to other things would be in the realm of life repair, applying certain things to PTS conditions or life rudiments that, or personal goals that standard tech either doesn't have, or it's very buried inside and you kind of have to go digging for it and you have to adapt some things. But to answer your question, no, there's no reason. Most people can go clear on the red on white bulletins, standard tech, and I have seen that, and I have myself gone clear in an organization that was following that. So I do appreciate standard tech, that it's workable.
Yeah. I heard of an indie, it was probably at one of the Free Zone conventions, talking about how at their org they have developed like some sort of life repair or like undercut to Scientology as a whole, basically because the world's so messed up and there's so many problems going around that in 1961 you could have someone come in and go up the bridge standardly, but now it's like you need a whole undercut to that, which is like fixing all these other problems, because you might have a kid, I don't know, I guess with like vaccine damage, or you might, like, there's a lot of things that have been, the SPs have done in this world to screw people up. So the person, if you didn't, so at this indie org, they developed some sort of big undercut to Scientology to try and fix a person up just so they're in a state to do Scientology. And I think it's quite interesting because you could see some kid that's got like autism or something like that, and if they went up through the thingos, I mean, yeah, of course they'll get wins and that sort of stuff, but I feel like they would always feel like they're a bit screwed up and they won't be able to attest to clear because they're like, oh, I've still got this sort of problem, and it's probably could be because they're vaccine damaged or something. What do you think of that? Like the undercut?
No, I'm tracking with you. I think the tendency in the church, in the standard lineup, was sort of to rush people through in the sense of not doing special rundowns that might be perfect for certain people, as well as not really paying as much attention as should be done by the case supervisor to what the guy wants handled. So sometimes that's bypassed, and I actually specialize in auditing people around the clear band. Either they haven't quite attested to clear, maybe they've done all their grades, or they're old-timers who've been around a long time, and I always go in and do a life repair, and it's fantastic for them because a lot of stuff was bypassed on their route. They were kind of pushed along. The grade chart is good, but there are special situations that have to be watched for, and there are sometimes missed if the CS isn't able, for example, to read the worksheets, where the pre-clear brought it up. That's a very common problem. Different auditors, different orgs, that kind of a thing, and the person kind of gets lost and goes into apathy because he knows he told the auditor at one point, and he feels like he didn't get duplicated or acknowledged, and that's kind of lost in the folder. So what I try to do in my interviews is make sure that we haven't bypassed an area that's now gone into apathy that the person wanted all along when they came in Scientology. That's very important, and it gets some of the biggest gains and wins, and then the person can then have his full attention on going clear on the grade chart.
Yeah, I definitely think that the life repair's been ignored a little bit in the church. Like, I heard of how Alan Stanfield was telling me how in their old mission, a new person would come in, and the guy who was like OT8 or something, who was a CS, would come up with a perfect life repair or a perfect program, like tailored to that person, and then after that they start on the normal route. And I think that's when I first got into Scientology, I noticed that as well. When I think I got into objective auditing, I was kind of like, hey, why didn't I do this like day one? Like, why did I have to do these other crappy things that weren't really what I needed at that moment? Like the church are doing a little bit of the cookie cutter thing where they're like, this is the routine, everyone does the same thing. But I like this idea of doing good life repairs, taking anything from the bridge, anywhere on the bridge, whatever is needed for that person, fixing that person up that's in front of you. Like, because, how people say standard tech is whatever works. So whatever works in that person, whatever handles their PTPs or whatever, and then they can start on the bridge. Because anyway, I was wondering about, I should have asked this.
You're right, just let me say, that's the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
And this is another tragedy of the breakup of the Mission Network by Miscavige's new team in 1981 and 1982. A lot of CSs were doing really thorough life repairs, and that was the hallmark of the Mission Network, that they knew to do that. That's what they did. And when that Mission Network was knocked out and all these requirements, for example, in the church, it's required to have a class 4 to start a new person out, which is, I can see some justification for, but, that's not the only thing, but various requirements get in the way, and a new person now doesn't get as much attention to life repair as they did back in the old days before the Mission Network was disrupted.
Yeah, look, you can see this happening in other industries when it comes to, especially in Australia. I don't know what it's like in America, but we've got a lot of bureaucracy and like bullshit government regulations. And so what it's done is that if someone wants to learn how to be a heater mechanic or a car mechanic or a builder or something, they go through all this crappy training and they have to pay for these expensive courses. And I'm sure they learn some good things in it, but what it does is it stops the person from learning on the job and thinking for themselves and working out what works. It stops them from using common sense and using their mind. So what you get is you get a heating mechanic that's told that this pipe needs to be this length and this cord needs to be that way and there needs to be these thingos. So you'll get them to put a heater in for you, and it would actually cost a lot more than really what it needs to, because it's got these stupid extra little things that tends to happen with bureaucracies and governments where they've got these extra rules. And I had a heating mechanic come and check out my heater recently, and I'd done it myself, right, because I'm a bit of a handyman, and he was kind of a bit shocked because it was like, whoa, someone's rebellious, they just put in a heater yourself, like, oh, whoa. And he picked out a few faults in it, and the faults he picked out and were little silly things like the cord wasn't they want you to get an electrician to specifically put a power point right next to the heater to plug it in. But what I did is I'd taken an extension lead from some other point in the house and drawn it out to the heater. There's nothing wrong with that. The heater works fine. But they have some regulation that's against that. So they're like, oh, you can't do that. And like, I saw him pick out these stupid little faults, And then he said something about a pipe that I'd put in and said it was made of plastic, and I thought, that's strange, why would I put a plastic pipe in? And I checked it out, and it was just metal, but it had like some paint on it that made it look like it was plastic. But he couldn't even... But it was really stupid. He couldn't even look at the heater and see that it was a metal pipe. Like, he wasn't... Basically, he wasn't a smart heating mechanic, whereas I could tell my grandpa's generation, he would come and look at a heater because he hadn't been brainwashed by the whole, you have to follow these rules and regulations, and he could think, and he would go, oh, okay, this is a heater, this is how it works. He could see that the pipe wasn't plastic, he could see what it was. And so I could see this young... new heating mechanic being screwed up by all these rules and regulations that he's been trained in, and at the end of the day ends up making a stupid mechanic that has to charge more for putting heaters in. And I can see how the exact same thing happened with Scientology and auditors, in that the auditors were like having to follow all these rules and regulations. It was confusing them, it stopped them from using common sense on the PC, and it stuffed up the tech and made it more expensive.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good analogy. The technician versus the artist, or the technical specialist, or the person who has the broader view of what the tech is for and what the tools are. A lot of auditors don't know how many tools are buried in those tech volumes.
And I don't think they understand. I don't think they understand the tech. I think they're just more robotically following the routines, and they're not told to think. They're not encouraged to think with it. And there's a big difference, I think, even like, because I only have a lot of experience with objective processes, but if you understand the process and then run it on someone, I think you can get a lot more wins on the PC as opposed to just reading it and then repeating the commands. It's sort of like... You know what I mean? Like, you can do a much better job if you understand it. You know what I mean? Like SOP 8C, you can get them, like, touch that with your left ring finger, and like you can get them into it and stuff. Makes a big difference.
Absolutely. There's no substitute for real understanding. And that's the point of the study tapes, is making an auditor that has judgment, that can use tools and that can see situations in front of them, can... what we called obnosis, the pre-clear, what he needs, what he's saying, and what could be done technically to help. So yes, it's very important to do a broad study of the tech, and it's worse than that, Andy. In the church, you're actually punished for thinking for yourself. So
yeah,
that it's bad enough when you have somebody who doesn't know to think for themselves, but when someone does think for themselves and gets punished for it, as happens at Flag or in the church, then you're not going to get an auditor that can think.
Yeah, exactly. And so with these stupid government regulations that just slow our economy down and make things more expensive and just mean that there's more jobs created for these bureaucrats that have nothing better to do with their lives and they need to get audited, with that, they always have some sort of argument to instigate these rules and measures. Like maybe one heater caught on fire and blew up a house or something, which was a really odd occurrence. And so then they're like, oh no, we have to put heater regulations out. So in Scientology, there might have been one or two people who were like actually squirreling, that were doing some funky things that were totally not standard tech and stuff. So then they use this argument of like it has to be standard tech, and it means that they can just control the shit out of the auditor and the CS and everything. And it's just taken way too far. It's just like, yeah, we don't want squirrels, but then hold on, in their attempt to try and stamp out squirrels, it's just ruined the tech.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You must have judgment and ability to think with the data, or you just have a mechanic or a technician who, if he doesn't have a really spot on CS that can help move him up and out of that condition, is going to be very mechanical and robotic.
Yeah, robotic. Like for example, my mum had gotten a oven mechanic to come check out her oven because there was something wrong with it. Now, it was a little bit different to a usual oven, so he worked on it and couldn't fix it, right? And so, and and he was probably one of these regulations, robotically trained heater mechanics. And then she got my grandpa to come and look at it, and he was a car mechanic, but because he'd learnt common sense and learnt to just look and try and understand and not be paranoid about regulations, and basically his thinking hadn't been messed with by all these rules and regulations, so we could just go, I'm going to see what we can do. And of course, he could fix the problem. He could see it and isolate the problem and work out what it was, whereas a heating mechanic couldn't. So I imagine with CSing and auditing, it's just a similar thing that's gone on, where they've just been taught this robotic way, they don't understand it, they can't think, and then a case comes to them, and I don't know, there's just something really bad about not letting someone learn on the job and learn from experience and learn common sense,
Yeah, auditors are made by auditing. LRH pointed that out, and LRH saw the same thing that you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of communism, is this whole regulation thing, and it's just crazy. So when it comes to levels that are above clear, you don't mind squirreling a little bit. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think at the point of clear, and this is a difficult one to get by the standard techies because there's so much indoctrination from the church, from LRH in his writings. It's becomes really serious and secret. I think we need to go back to the late 50s. LRH put out a writing called The Freedoms of Clear, and he at that time he already had creative processing, the Philadelphia doctorate course, a number of things for. It was a very exciting time, the late 50s. A number of new techniques, powerful auditing processes, and all of that was in the realm of OT. So if you really get into the history of Scientology, you realize that people were coming into OT ability and doing advanced auditing in many different directions. And that after 65, it narrowed to level after level in one direction only. And my personal belief, and this comes from a lot of experience and being myself a clear, is that a clear should be able to solo audit and handle his rudiments and correction lists and anything he needs to, including, finding items, PTS items when he runs into trouble in life. That's my philosophy, that the clear needs to be turned loose. And by that, I don't mean, we all have different definitions of squirreling. My definition is that it's harmful to the mind and not worth doing, and it's actually damaging. So that, no. But, a tighter definition of squirreling, that means don't do anything that isn't in the standard lineup. I don't have that definition, or I don't have back off on exploring my case in solo. I've handled a lot of things in solo, and I have not done the standard OT levels yet, and I do intend to do them. I don't put as much emphasis or importance that others do. I have, other things and other priorities, and, I can hear the church reg saying, well, you're off doing other things, and the levels are what will handle what you want handled, and that might be correct, that might not be. All I'm saying is that a lot of the seriousness in the warnings turned out to be not so valid, and I have interviewed many, many people who have done these levels, and I get many different reviews, and I've gotten, I'll give you some of the things that come out consistently. Even people that have become disillusioned with the OT levels have always said that OT2 was one of the best levels they ever did. Okay? So there's a lot of disagreement with OT3 out there for those who have abandoned the bridge, let's say. And I'm, I haven't done that, so I don't know about it. So I'm really not qualified to give a expert opinion here, but my personal philosophy is that there are a lot of advanced things, advanced abilities that you do by training and not necessarily by auditing. It takes practice to do that. In the old days, the original OT levels had drills and practice on them. The Creation of Human Ability book and the Philadelphia Doctorate had drills and abilities. And that's really, if you're going to do something like remote viewing, there isn't necessarily auditing directly on that, although you could prep check it and probably get some amazing good results.
What do you mean by that? Sorry, I got a bit of a MU on prep check.
Yeah. Prep check is a standard way to get charge off any subject. For example, if you're a failed musician, or let's go back to remote viewing, you're a failed remote viewer, I could run you through a prep check, which is basically suppressed, invalidated, all these buttons, protested. There's like a standard 15 or so buttons that you go through and you see if there's any reading charged areas, and you get off charge on areas that may be preventing you from advancing or going forward. And oddly enough, we were talking earlier about life repair. A good life repair should do some prep checking on, if someone's shy about girls, you can do a prep check on girls. But back to our point, let's prep check remote viewing. What problems have you had, when you tried to do it? And that can open, it may not handle everything, but it can certainly get off charge that might be in the way. And then, other levels can kind of help with that maybe. But you're going to have to eventually just sit down and drill and practice and have someone that you trust that's a good supervisor that won't invalidate you, and help you get up on a gradient through whatever ability you're seeking to acquire. So that was kind of left undone. You can use Scientology tech to fill this stuff in and actually design drills. And it's really an exciting area because, yes, by the time you could actually work on this, and by the time you were done, it would all be standard in the sense that it was all derived on Scientology basics, gradients, certain processes, and drills. And yet these are not published as levels. The work, for whatever reason, didn't get completed, and so it's pretty well known for a lot of people that OT8 is the first actual OT level. It's where you're actually finally auditing yourself. Although really on OT1 and OT2, you're also auditing yourself. But from 3 to new OT7, you're auditing other factors, your composite case.
What about objectives?
Objectives can be done kind of on an OT basis, where you're actually, a lot of times when I'm doing objectives, for example, I will sometimes do them on a higher gradient, like they had in the old days, where they took it out because there was some idea that it was vaguely related to creative processing, and creative processing was canceled. I'm trying to think of the example. I think it's like there's a level, a number of assists. Hold it still, keep it from going away, and make it more solid. And what they did is they threw away make it more solid, which is actually a creative process where you're actually creating the object as being more solid.
Yeah.
So it's actually, you can put those back in. There's nothing that says you can't because of our reference technical D grades. Nothing's canceled here. Those HCOBs are still there. And just because they took it out of the grades lineup does not mean we can't use it. And that's actually a mild creative process that can be added to enhance objectives to make them more in the direction of OT. So yes, objectives can be looked at as well.
Yeah, I think that they're doing that with the new Survival Rundown. They're doing more things that are interesting and more OT.
Oh, they might have done that. I haven't been able to review that because no one's leaked it or published it that I know of. So I would love to see the new rundown to see if they actually got around to correcting that.
Well, I recommended that everyone get their hands on this book that the church is selling called The Objective Processes Handbook or something, and it's this thick book of just tons of objective processes. It's interesting to get your hands on to see, because it might really help CSs with finding processes or something. I don't know where they got all the processes from, but apparently they look
like
apparently they
in packs and the objective. That would be a great reference to have. Yeah.
Yeah, they looked through all of it, everything, and they just picked out all the objective processes that were said. What would you say to someone who's listening to this, who thinks, "Oh, this Scott Gordon guy sounds like a bit of a screw"? Or what would you say to that?
I'd say they don't know me and they don't know what I'm doing. My rule of thumb is follow what's written, by standard tech, unless there's a really good reason not to. And usually that reason is the pre-clear has a specialized request, life repair related, and there are certain processes that can run and handle that area in a far more focused way. But the idea that I just am running around doing experimental stuff all the time because I want to, I don't think standard tech's good enough or whatever. No, that's not the case at all. I'm willing to explore, yes, and think outside the box, and I'm willing to use my Scientology basics and re-examine the philosophy to make sure we're getting the product we want, which is somebody that has their life ruins handled, that's getting what they want out of Scientology and the auditing. And I definitely think that post-clear, there are a lot of areas. For example, we talked last time in our interview about meditation, different practices and things that a clear can now get. The whole idea of going clear was to get the factors out of the way that made, for example, yoga, meditation, all the things we're not allowed to do going up the bridge that made it problematic in the first place, including creative processing. So in theory, if you go back to the early LRH, you should be able to do these things now when you get these other factors out of the way and your case is clear. I mean, it's clear. It's like you're not going to run into the traps. So you can now get something out of yoga or other practices that you might not have before. And it actually kind of angers me when people try to put the lid back on clear. Clear is supposed to be a freedom and an outstanding achievement in Scientology. It's the goal. And the OT levels have a kind of a, I'm sorry to say, but, a kind of a narrow focus. And other than OT8, which is the only thing we have in the field, and we don't have all of it as far as I understand, we really don't have a whole lot for clears. We need more permission for clears to learn to handle their case, which makes them better auditors, happier in life. I mean, I know because I do solo auditing from time to time when I feel I need it, and it's awesome because I have the training background and the study to be able to handle my own case, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to do.
What do you think of Ron's org? I mean, I like the sounds of them. I think Captain Bill seems like he was pretty switched on to what was going on, and I don't know. I've seen some of the products that people have been to Ron's org. What do you think of them? Seems pretty good.
Yeah, when I look at what Captain Bill did, Captain Bill, first of all, is very loyal to LRH. Just adored the man, was loyal and dedicated, and he never stopped wearing his Sea Org hat. And people can ridicule that. I respect him for that much. I don't always agree with everything he came up with, and for the fact that he really went into areas that I think are overdone. That's my opinion. And again, I haven't done these levels, so I'm not expert on that. However, he did very similar to I have a very similar approach. He went back to LRH early basics and early information, like from the 1952 when LRH was first outlining composite case, and he and those tapes, by the way, became confidential in the church. They're called the Hubbard College Lectures, and Captain Bill did the same approach that I do to try as much as possible to stay with standard tech and Scientology basics and use those to forward. But along the way, he made some discoveries that were not anywhere in LRH tech, and they were his discoveries. So that happens. That's what technical research is, and people need to realize that's how the tech came about, because field auditors would write into LRH from 1950 on. And
I mean, it was teamwork. The whole tech thing was teamwork, with Hubbard doing most of the work, but it was still teamwork.
Yeah, and I know some of the Ronsorg people. They're very good. They're very intelligent, and they don't stay in a tight box. They're able to think with the tech and the data and CSing, and so. But yet at the same time, they haven't thrown away the discipline or the respect for standard tech, which is basically, my approach. And so I'm glad they're out there keeping Scientology going, in their areas, and that's commendable.
Yeah, I should have asked you this earlier. It was about this whole evil people thing. So do you believe that some people are animated or guided by a force of evil that exists in the universe or outside the universe or something? And do you believe that they are synthetic beings, like not actually Thetans, like some sort of artificial intelligence? Because I've heard this idea that some of these people like George Soros, some of these big SPs are like synthetic beings or something. What do you think of that?
Well, there's two things. It's really, I don't think it's that hard to understand or explain. I've done a lot of study in this area. Handling evil is perhaps my greatest interest as an auditor, and that's why I was a DSA. It's fourth dynamic auditing, and it takes an incredible confront of evil. And I'm not saying I have that. It's something I've been working on, and it's come about. It's quite a difficult process to go through. It's a lot of case gain, but it's not smooth. Going PTS and getting sick and making mistakes around real sociopaths is no fun. But I feel that it's something mankind has to confront and learn to handle. So let me give two case phenomena that explain people indulging in evil behavior. First of all, there's what we learned on the PTSSP materials. Actually, there's three things then. What we learn in the PTSSP materials as a person stuck in an incident. So the person himself is stuck in an incident, and his attention is on defending himself from the world. It's a big generality. Everybody's out to get him. Yeah. And that explains type 3 behavior. It explains paranoia. It explains people who just can't trust anybody and can't make gains in auditing because they can't trust the auditor enough to open up enough to get some gains. Yeah. So there's that phenomena. Second phenomena that I want to point out that is really not emphasized enough in the tech in the Hubbard lineup. And that is a being can become, I know Hubbard's talked about it, but it's just not punched up for its importance. We're talking about a being that becomes ARC broken with the universe. And what I mean by that is somebody who is not just tired of life, like could get suicidal, but someone on a bigger scale who's tired of existence, and not just tired of existence, but it begins to rage against existence. you get the phenomena of children slamming the door and say, I wish I'd never been born, because of their momentary upset with their parents. That's a good idea of an ARC break. If you can imagine an ARC break of that magnitude, but it's continual. It's not just something that goes away in an hour, That person goes around and picks up bodies, goes from one life to the next, angry at whatever concept of God they may have, angry at the universe, angry at life, and that probably explains somebody like George Soros or these major SPs. They actually aren't, just no case gain, but they're not content to just sit back. They actually have a compulsion to destroy life wherever they find it. And it's incredibly evil, and it's incredibly difficult to confront. I mean, I find myself, it's no fun to confront it for myself, and I've been looking at this stuff for a long time. I've studied the sociopath and the psychopath, but even psychiatry doesn't have the concept in front of them of a being who's more than one life, who has this kind of inversion of dynamics. We're not talking, suppressed dynamics where they're not doing anything on their third dynamic. We're talking the third dynamic is inverted, so they have to destroy groups or they have to destroy mankind.
Yeah.
And, for example, an inverted fifth dynamic will cause somebody to destroy life. So they'll start a chemical company and they'll spray toxins all over the environment, just trying to wipe out life of any form.
So these beings, you don't think they're synthetic?
Well, let's get into number 3 then.
Number three. Hold on. Let him say number 3. So with number 2, what's interesting about them is they just look like they're so comfortable with who they are. They just sit there, like for example George Soros, and they can talk absolute evil, and it looks like it's like, no, this isn't a messed up. This is what I think when you look at it. It's like, no, this isn't a messed up, aberrated being. This looks like a being that actually is a whole inversion as a being. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
It looks like there's not something look like, because I've come across people who have been ones who have been dramatizing. I've seen them change and show signs of emotions, and I could see how they were dramatizing evil, and I could see them evolve out of that with case gain and stuff. But then these other ones, it looks like they just look so professional and so perfect. It looks like they are evil from the start, from the get go. Anyway.
Yeah, and along that line, before I go to the third one, while we're talking about this. We're talking about inverted dynamics. And it also tells you, because these people don't seem to follow the laws of karma quite like normal people. Yeah. And it makes people very caved in about the whole idea of evil. It's almost like if you can't beat them, join them. And actually, people will start to surrender to this, and that's called the contagion of aberration, by the way. But this is a major thing. It's not done just because someone's, angry or because somebody's got an ARC break. It takes a major shift to put them in this category. But what explains this is, and LRH only has, as far as I know, a couple of lectures where he touches on this. It's the inverted dynamics. And it tells you, when you see these guys and their success and their happiness, apparent happiness at just destroying life and being successful at it and having so much money, it tells you that this universe, which I believe is neutral, this universe is neither good nor evil. It's just there. It tells you that this universe surrenders to purpose. And, some of us, who are trying to do good things and have good purposes have seen that. When we're really on purpose, we can accomplish miracles, and the universe just kind of parts ways. The waters part, and we can walk across and get things done. Well, apparently, from what I've observed, to try to explain this, the unexplainable, is this universe surrenders to a sincere purpose, and these guys have sincere purpose, and they really care about their evil purpose of wiping out life, and they'll devote a lot of time and energy and purpose to it. And the universe just kind of parts and surrenders in the same kind of way. And then you realize that is a very important principle, and explains the, what do they have? I'm sorry, I blanked out on what it is, because it's kind of like a new age thing where they're, getting what you want, the magic of getting what you want, kind of a thing. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
The secret.
The secret, and they call it something else, some kind of principle or some kind of
manifestation.
Yeah, man. Exactly. Those things are taught, in New Age courses, and there's some validity to them. And oddly enough, they were taught before Dianetics came out. And a lot of people that came into Dianetics and Scientology were really tuned into what Hubbard was saying. He was saying, look, the reason you're not getting your postulates is because you've got all this case in the way, and you got to actually get through it. The way out is the way through. And he was the first to kind of frown on the positive thinking people that were only getting people who were almost either natural clears, or they didn't have much out rudiments in life, or they really had a strong purpose. And their postulates were working when they did these courses. And everybody else is having to come into Dianetics and co-audit and work on their case. And then they could go back, and this is why connects us back to what I was saying earlier about the freedoms of clear. When you're a clear, you need to sort of wear the take a lesson from the Wizard of Oz. It's not that the clear is an imaginary state or something, but it's that you have to actually own that state and realize that you have a lot of case out of the way, and that you can work on things like the secret and those things and start to get a lot more results than you did before. And a lot of people, it doesn't occur to them to do it. But anyway, this universe apparently surrenders to purpose, and people with evil purposes sometimes know how to handle the universe. They actually teach that in those dark occult circles like advanced Freemasonry.
Kind of like Darth Vader, like you're using the dark side of the Force.
Exactly. So there is a force, and that force is neutral. It's like a force in the universe, and it can be hijacked or taken over by good or evil. Okay. So this brings me to my third thing. You're talking about the kind of being... So hold
on a second. So when it comes to there being a god or a devil, or like a god or an evil force, what you're saying is that there's only one force, but you can get benefit from it either way. So like Jesus and like other good spiritual people, it's not that they're getting the force helping them, and evil people as well are getting the force helping them.
Well, yeah, I would say that powerful masters, either dark or light, are drawing from what I was referring to mainly was physical universe energy, because we're operating in the physical universe, and it presents a barrier. It's either a smooth ride or a rough ride, depending on how much alignment you have and how much knowledge you have and how much case you have that's connected with failures in the past, which is why auditing is fascinating, because it remedies that and it opens up the door for you to be able to manage these forces again. Now, I think there are other things on the seventh dynamic or spiritual dynamic that may or may not apply or have use for evil. I like to think that truth and good have an advantage in the sense that that the seventh dynamic or spirit is naturally good, or basically good, as LRH pointed out. Not just man is basically good, but everything in this universe started out basically good, and there's something aberrated or wrong with it if it's not. And it traces back to incidents and decisions made by spiritual beings. So we're back in the realm of the being. It's a free will universe, and some beings can wind up choosing evil, and they begin to specialize it and become very good at it.
So let's go on with this third type that you were talking about of evil.
Okay, the third type I would classify, using the composite case, which is factors that are not necessarily you, but are attached to you, spiritual influences. And don't worry, I'm not going to get into OT data particularly, but I do want to point out that, what Ron calls in one of his last bulletins, where he does make this public, the composite case, there are spiritual influences. And this is why it's so important to audit the person and make that person more powerful, so that he's really in charge of his space and that these other factors don't have the influence that they might otherwise have. When people indulge in drugs, out ethics, sexual misconduct, there's a long list of things. They weaken their personal power, and spiritual influences can begin to enter in and take over. And in the old days of the Catholic Church or the Christian viewpoint, we call that possession. So that's a factor that has to be taken account in evil. And it gets into the OT levels, really, when we're talking about how do you get rid of these factors. Well, there's techniques on the OT levels to do that. However, it's helpful just to know that it's not always the real person, but the real person, the being, what we call the Thetan or the spiritual being in charge, is always, we have to always hold that person responsible, because there's no way that an outside influence can take over unless you yield by ceasing to effort in the direction of conducting an ethical life or surviving. So some people succumb without committing suicide.
Yeah.
They let up influences in and take over, or they let their drug addiction or their alcoholism take over. And then you have other spiritual forces who are at work, and that may be part of the mix. And it may be, I just outlined three different factors in somebody who's acting evil, and any one or combination of the above factors can be at work.
Now, the only thing I don't like, though, is this synthetic being thing, because to me what you're describing would be possession. That has nothing to do with synthetic. To me, synthetic means like artificial intelligence, not a real being. That doesn't make sense.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand that.
In that case, we go back to the first example I gave you, which is a classic PTSSP material, where we're talking about a being who's both stuck on the track, and Ron goes on to say that this being, in order to survive, has adopted a valence or a personality, and it's synthetic in the sense that it's not real. No being is truly started out evil, but he begins to have idea how evil is, and he will begin to build a personality that makes others wrong, that dominates others. It's all classic. It's the same as a service facsimile. It is, evil intentions are actually really dark service facsimiles if you look at them. They're things that are used to destroy others, to make them wrong, to harm their survival, and to dominate. And you see all of that in somebody like George Soros. So George Soros is a synthetic personality in the sense that that's what he uses to handle life. That's what he presents. That's what you'll get when you shake his hand.
Yeah, so it's like a being can never... Synthetic beings don't exist, but it's like a being can mock up that they're a robot and become like a robot, or become like a surfac and act in a certain way. And it's like they're... Because you notice in aberrated people, I come across some people they really do act robotically, and they're really messed up.
Right, and this is why personal responsibility is so important and why Scientology is so valuable. You don't see hardly any other, except for certain New Age cults, that put so much emphasis on personal responsibility and then empower the individual. In all of the cases I gave, the person, the being, the spiritual being, is there powering up the synthetic valence or deciding not to be responsible and letting something else take over, or deciding to make the world wrong because of their ARC break, because of their injustice. And that being is ultimately a free will being able to make the choice. This is why you see people who have been subjected to horrendous abuses, things that should have wiped them out, and they're still doing good. They had MK Ultra, mind control, electric shock, and pain, and they still chose good. The being always has a choice, and it's important to that concept of spiritual or personal responsibility. And the auditor has to keep that in mind and be very careful, because you're often bringing somebody in this state from a state of almost no responsibility or just enough to get in session, and you've got to get off on a gradient, little things, little steps when you're helping somebody who's in a psychotic break or is indulging in evil, little baby steps to get more and more theta so that person can confront his irresponsibility and come out of that state. And it can be done, but as LRH says at the end of the introspection rundown, I think it is, he says to the CS, don't punish an auditor who doesn't succeed on this, because he's taking a case that's almost impossible. And if he succeeds, give him all the commendations, and if he doesn't, leave it alone, because a person who's really deep in case has made some choices that are not necessarily ethical, and an auditor shouldn't be judgmental about it, but also should be aware that, the auditor can't do it for the PC. The auditor is facing a free will being, and the best that he can do is be loving enough and using the correct gradient that person is going to choose to come out of that state. And that is how a successful psychotic break handling is done. There's no other way. It's using the tech in such a way with high ARC to pull that person into a state of deciding to be on your side, be on your team. We're gonna break through this N theta, these incidents we're stuck in, and we're going to get through it. And it's a matter of willpower. And a person, that spiritual being, is a decision maker. That's what makes the person a spiritual being. It's just a fundamental quality of a thetan or a spiritual being, is decision maker. And evil is a decision.
Yeah, exactly. And you get some people who have been molested as a kid or whatever, and so then they can grow up to be fine. Like I think it happened to Oprah. She grew up to be fine. But then you get other people who grow up to then molest kids themselves. And there are a lot of people who are apparently homosexuals who they just had that happen to them as a young age. And so then as an adult, they grow up to be a homosexual. And it's just I don't know. They annoy me, these low-tone people, because they're just ridiculous in their behaviour. Like instead of choosing to fight evil, they go, well, I'm going to join it. You know what I mean? It's like you've been scammed by something and you're annoyed about getting scammed, and so you go, I'm going to start my own scam. Screw them. I'll get my free money. I'll get my revenge. And it's a really aberrated way of being. But you had something about you mentioned to me that you had something about doing a successful introspection rundown. No,
actually, a psychotic break handling.
Yeah.
I used some knowledge of the introspection rundown, but I was not able to actually use the rundown itself because I was not of the class of auditor at the time. I was still in the church. but it was helpful to have read that and had that knowledge, because it came in very handy in knowing what to do to help this person through it.
A person you were helping on it do it?
Yeah, I had a fellow staff member who went into a psychotic break through a interesting combination of factors that were upsetting him and had re-stimulated him while he was working on staff. And it's a kind of a long story. I don't know if we have time to get into it now, but I'd be happy to tell it at some point. It probably would take an hour show for an hour. But just to summarize, I used my auditor level 0 training. I was a level 0 at the time. I still am. And I used my study of psychotics and auditing psychotics. And this person's willingness, he was willing to, he wanted help, and he wanted to get out of the state he was in. And so, and I had cooperation from his wife, and through a incredibly difficult several days, we finally came out of it, and he's living a very productive life now. He's never reverted, and it's just, you know, to sum it up, I just wanted to say that the tech works, and if you can think with it, and probably the most important factor in working with a psychotic is affinity and love and ARC, willing to grant the person beingness and not force anything on them. Yeah. And just offer them an opportunity to help dig them out of the state that they're in. And I learned a valuable lesson, and it was, we're still good friends to this day. He's leading a productive life, and he's very happy. So it was a very good result. And a funny anecdote to add to that is that the church still doesn't even know the details of this other than what I had in his folder, because oddly enough, it was such a touchy cycle, because, you know, you didn't want to get the media get a hold of this, or you didn't, it was what we called a flap, you know, somebody was working on staff, and all of a sudden they're in a psychotic break. So it was something I was trying to, from my hat as a DSA, keep protected, so much so that I couldn't actually report it to my seniors. So they never got a report on this, because a couple years, you know, time went by. I never got back to them, and it's a funny thing, because I was thinking that if I told the story, it'd be news to OSA, what happened in Costa Rica, that almost, you know, if it had gone bad, it could have been a tremendous flap for the church, because the guy could have suicided or wound up. We actually rescued him from a state mental hospital, so that's how bad it got.
Was he like a celebrity or something?
No, but he was. He had joined staff, and he was doing fine until he ran into certain re-stimulation, and, you know, some people who were being mean to him on staff that really wound up being, you know, suppressive to me as well later. So there was a lot of factors that went into his break. It was just like the perfect storm of trouble with his wife, trouble in his personal life, not having money to buy a good diet, working himself to the bone, all those factors, and he just, you know,
so he didn't have a history of being a mentally ill person.
No, he never did. He didn't have a history of it. So it was like, yeah, like I said, a perfect storm of factors that worked together to drive him over the edge.
Wow. What would you say the main reason that caused it was?
Primarily, he was trying to qualify for training, and it came up, some of his background on the second dynamic was pretty embarrassing, and he was having trouble with the fact that he had brought it up in an interview on the meter, and the person doing the interview didn't quite have their TRs in, which means, for people who haven't studied Scientology, basically means that they didn't hang in there as a good auditor. They kind of ran away from confronting it. And so as a result, this person was stuck with an incredible, when you confess something that's really big to somebody, you need a good acknowledgement or it sticks. And he had this stuck thing that he wasn't sure was going to get him removed from staff, or he wasn't sure if he was guilty or bad person. It just made him kind of spin because he was like self-listing or trying to find the reason by himself for why he had indulged in this crazy behavior in his past, and whether it was going to keep him from going up the bridge or being eligible for staff or training. So he's walking around with this, and it's a withhold from his wife, it's a withhold from all the other staff, and he wants to get the withhold off, but he doesn't know how. So it became a huge problem, and it just got worse and worse, and his body rudiments went out with inadequate sleep and food. He went to a Free Winds event where they talked about whole track data, and so he got really electrified when he was in the state. So not only has he got this huge withhold that he can't maneuver around, but now he's getting obsessed with the idea that we may lose Scientology on this planet, and that that there's a lot of whole track stuff and that he needs to step up and work harder, and so he puts more time in on his post and is not getting adequate sleep, and he gets into this whole idea of, well, Scientology's got its back against the wall, the planet's going to wipe it out if we don't do our jobs every day.
Yeah, bad coincidences, everything coming together.
Once in a while.
Yeah, I think the skipping meals and having bad sleeps things makes a big difference. It's one thing you notice about people who are low-toned and stuff is that they'll just do that, where they won't have like good quality regular food, and they'll have like crappy sleeps, and they'll just... It's silly when you hear them, because you hear them complain about something like a headache or blah, 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 and you find out that they haven't eaten since like 7 a.m. or like it's just like, you just get the simple basics in, it's just get them in and then you're fine. So I need some sort of quick answers to some of these questions. So have you heard of the Mandela effect?
I've heard of that, but I really can't speak about it because I don't know what it is exactly.
All right. It's just so... I'm not going to talk about it, but it's so epic. The only thing I think it can be is something where you postulate and your postulate comes true, and you shift into a whole alternate reality where that postulate is true, but the alternate reality, things are a little bit different. Anyway, it's something to do with there's parallel universes that are slightly different.
Yeah.
And changing into them, and that we have recently changed into like a whole new parallel universe. It's really, really out there, but just check out. Do you know that scene in Wizard of Oz where the monkeys run away and she goes, "Fly, my pretties, fly," and the monkeys go away? Well, apparently that doesn't exist, that scene anymore. Apparently she just says, "Fly, fly," and then they fly away. So reality's changed. That's the whole point of the Mandela effect. There's numerous examples of our reality just changing, and everyone's going, what the hell is going on? This movie's changed, that's changed, that's changed. Really, really bizarre stuff. It's tricky, It's like, I'm not even, especially... when you look into the Mandela effect and when it says history can change, so 2,000 years ago, Jesus could have done this, but then also 2,000 years ago, he could have not done this, he could have done that. Because of the Mandela effect where things actually change. It's just really out there, but it's basically almost saying there's no exact objective truth to what's going on. Like, that might be the whole secret of life, the whole truth about life, is that there is no actual truth. You know, things actually change, and it's all moldable, and it's this for this person, they've got their own reality, and it's that for that person, and it's like we try and, yeah, there are rules, like there's no absolutes basically, so yeah, you can say there's an overt motivation sequence here, and there's someone needs to get audited there, or whatever, but there's always, it's not 100%, nothing is 100%, there is no actual truth, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I would actually beware of that kind of philosophy and really dig in and make sure that it's not itself a psychological operation being run on us, because, as you know from the tech, evil-minded people or people indulging in evil want nothing more than to alter the past.
Yeah.
Both to alter history and to deny that they did what they did.
Yes.
And that's a reactive mechanism that fuels this. And humans, unfortunately, because they're whole track beings with lots of overts, every one of us, none of us is innocent, and we are magnets for this kind of philosophy. So I tend to kind of frown on anything that insists that the past can be changed, other than the past can be alleviated as an auditing, and that can produce things that would look like the Mandela effect, but it doesn't mean the tragedy or the mistake or the incident or the overt did not happen. It just means that we've alleviated the charge, and people can actually look at it with more perspective, and maybe some things shift. The actual act did not shift, but people can move on, and they're not stuck in it. That's the beauty of auditing. And I think we have to keep an objective universe, which is why objectives work so well, as an anchor, including its history, and realize that, what happened. That's what actually one of the definitions that Mark Passio, who's a really good teacher I recommend for people on this very subject, points out, that the truth is what really happened. And we all have different perspectives on what happened, but still that objective thing of what happened remains there. And you can actually go, they call it the Akashic record in, I think I'm pronouncing that right, in people who are psychic, that they can actually go and they can look at the past and they can view it as is, and that's called the Akashic record. And basically, I think that's why auditing works, is because you're going to inspect what happened, and it's very subjective because you're running your viewpoint. That's where you pick up the charge, and that's what gets the most out of it. But you can actually run other viewpoints too. I don't recommend indulging in that, because it's probably not worth the time you put into it, because the charge level is insignificant. But at the same time, I think what happened. It's never going to change, but you can process what happened, which is the beauty of auditing. And then in some cases, you're going to get what may look like what you described as the Mandela effect, because now people are okay with it. For example, when we someday run the 911 attack engram, there's a lot of false data, false pictures, false newscasts, fake media. Oh my God, the list goes on. When we can actually run that incident out for people and see what really happened on it, it's going to be mind-blowing, and it's not going to be what people have mocked up because of what they've been told. That's just a perfect example of a false reality that gets installed, and that's why it sticks. That's why it doesn't race. SPs love to they love to twist the truth and change it, because they've worked out as a habit that it's good to have people in a condition of being confused, because they're much easier to control. When you've got definite truth, like this is what's going on, this is the schedule, things that uptone people do, they lay out organized, simple, blah blah blah. It's harder to con people. But when you get people in this confused condition of, what's going on? I don't really know. You can push them around. You can say, come here and buy this insurance scam or something like that.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So I've got a quote here that you said. Now, I'll read it out, okay? You hear in the Free Zone that 90% of original St. Hill staff and students who helped him develop the tech were expelled from the church and declared suppressive. What they failed to mention is that Hubbard knew all about it and mainly instigated it all. That's an interesting statement.
Yeah. At the time that I wrote that a few years ago, I was looking into the history of Scientology and what Hubbard was doing, and I was shocked to find out that the St. Hill staff, which is, if you've ever been on staff, the bulletin gets pulled out all the time. I think it's a blue on white issue, and an LRHED about St. Hill size and how we got to make our org St. Hill size. And he's beaming with pride, it seems, in writing this, at what a big staff it was and what an efficient, organization. And then you find out that 90% of these people were declared SP, while LRH was in charge of Scientology. Most of them, I think, some of it happened after the 80s with David Miscavige, but a lot of it happened under LRH's watch.
Well, that's the thing I think I have a problem with, because I believe it's just like, the New World Order or bad people took over the church and they kicked out the St. Hill staff. I don't see it as being caused by LRH, but you're saying it's caused by LRH.
I'm saying he knew about a lot of the declares. I don't know the exact percentage, but I do know. I looked into the dates and stuff, and several of them came up before the takeover. So I realized that LRH knowingly and willingly allowed these people to be declared that had been his friends, that had been his co-workers at St. Hill, and I thought.
That could be Miscavige perverting communications that were sent to and from LRH.
Well, Miscavige didn't enter until about 79 or 80 and didn't take things over until 82.
Yeah.
And got on the communication lines in 81. And I'm talking, a lot of these people were declared in the late 60s and early 70s. Really? Not all of them. Certainly the church did the rest afterwards. Yeah. After the takeover, but enough to make me very troubled about the pattern that I saw in LRH of turning on his friends like Jack Horner, who had helped him from 1950, and he began sending the Guardian's office after him.
Why?
There's examples.
Why do you think?
I'm sorry?
Why do you think he turned on the St. Hill staff and people like Jack Horner?
I think because those guys were used to Scientology that was before KSW, okay. And before the ethics book, that was a lot freer in range of action, and LRH had a different plan in mind. And so, as people began, for example, that supervisor he had that he talks about on the St. Hill lectures, Red Sharp, he walked away because he saw the militancy of the Sea Org. They arrived, they throw a dagger in the ceiling. That they were told to do this by LRH. They say the Sea Org is here, things are different now. And they said, no, we're not going along with that. So they walked out. And of course that gets them declared. But, whether it's because they got declared because they protested and left and joined other groups, or because they were a convenient target for somebody to explain the crash stats of the week. I just saw all of this so repeatedly. It was like a big ARC break, Now I'm a little mellowed out on that. It's like, well, some of these people walked out. But I don't agree. See, I don't agree in the first place with LRH's direction of a militant org. The ethics book with all these penalties for people who associate with people who aren't with the program totally. In other words, creating a cult. And I think we see the results of that to this day. It's the church is kind of indulged in that kind of behavior, making people wrong who would like things to be a little more free and relaxed and not so militant and aggressive. It's just a matter of opinion. Different people have different opinions, and a lot of people really haven't dug into the history and found some of the shocking data out. Maybe they don't want to know, or maybe they don't have time. In spite of all I found out about LRH, like I pointed out last show and earlier this show, I still have a lot of respect for the man and his knowledge of the mind and the products of the technology as produced in the red volumes as helpful technology.
Maybe LRH was concerned about Scientology becoming sort of like a hippie sort of new age movement where people are like, yeah, man, just do what you want to do, and like, yeah. And I think he like wanted it to, I guess, be more of a strict group, I guess, that was more hardcore and was just like really dedicated to clearing the planet.
Yeah, and I can go along with that reasoning. The only thing where I really get into protests is when he actually violated the auditor's code or the supervisor's code or just plain ARC. When he overboarded the Class 8 students, that was way over the top. That was a violent action. It was done on women who couldn't swim. When I look at those things, then I can't grant LRH that, excuse. However, for a lot of it, a disciplined organization was needed. But those actions weren't needed to make a disciplined organization. Those were very engramic actions, and they weren't called for. They did not set a good example or a good leadership for how Scientology could run. And you had Class 8s coming back to the org and dramatizing some of the same behavior, and it sort of spread throughout Scientology. And it sometimes, yes, it made people snap and pop and get their discipline in, and sometimes it just kind of wrecked things. It depends on which stories you read, So yeah, it's something that everybody has to. I encourage everybody to do their own research, to research the history, and always keep in mind the good and the bad, and the fact that you don't have to believe or follow LRH in everything. And at the same time, you don't have to throw away the good in the tech just because you conclude that he did things that you wouldn't. So, I've been through that, and it's behind me. It doesn't mean I close my eyes to new stories that come up, but I sort of weigh the good and the bad, and I frankly find some of the things embarrassing and unmanageable in terms of, which is why I can't really call myself a true Hubbard Scientologist, because I have developed a healthy skepticism because of what I perceive are out ethics in the extreme, and things which actually damage Scientology and are part of the problem we still have with the modern church.
It's interesting. I think that
Cabot just made it worse. He certainly made it very much worse. Yeah, because he took those bad things and he magnified them, and he used what LRH had done in the past as justifiers for acting abusive from here on out. So we really have in Scientology a huge problem with reforming the church, because you have to bring people up to rejecting some of the things that LRH said, wrote, and did in order to bring about a high ARC effective, true religion in the sense of helping the maximum number of people and dynamics. I don't think it's going to be done unless people really confront that history. It's kind of ugly in some chapters.
Well, in around 1978, when Hubbard first sort of went off lines, right?
Yeah.
Things were going well, though. Things were booming. You know, like Flag was making tons of cash. The missions were selling a lot. It might have been more controlling, but the thing is that whatever they were doing up until 1978, I would say then that was good, and you'd keep it. But after that, that's when things started to go wild, when Hubbard went off lines and communications could have been changed, and it became much more strict, and heaps of people left in like 1983 and 82. So I don't know, I just feel like when Hubbard was around, when he was on lines, things were going good, and that he was a good, trustworthy source. Even if he did come up with some overboarding thing, I don't know, it still, I guess, kind of worked. What do you think?
Well, yeah, overboarding worked for people like Otto Roos, who was a Class 12. He was a badass. He could swim. He didn't like it, but he could swim and climb back on the ship. It wasn't engramic, and maybe it made him snap and pop, and maybe it was the correct ethics gradient for him. I'm picking a badass auditor, a guy who could hold his own space. It didn't work on the old ladies and the people who didn't know how to swim. It was very engramic, but that's beside the point. I think your point is that, and I would beware of bracketing the years too heavily because it depends on the area or where you were, but I would say that yes, the 70s were golden years. I've talked to many old-timers about that. Because there was a lot of independence. The mission network was strong. There wasn't a lot of policing from Sea Org units. In base wasn't consolidated. The Guardian's office acted as a kind of a checks and balances on the Sea Org. So you had sometimes the Guardian's office were behaving really badly, and the Sea Org would have to put ethics in or report it, or vice versa. So there were, and if someone really wants to see the good intentions of LRH shine through, look in the last years of the 70s when he was making the technical films, and any of the technical films that you watch, most of them, I'd say 90%, are done with a real sincere and intense effort to get the tech in visible format so people can learn how to help people. And LRH put so much energy into that, and he probably yelled at people and swore, and I've heard all those stories too. But, that was his way of getting a product. It's not the ideal way or the ultimate good way, but that he got a product of some really awesome technical films, which I sure wish we could have in the independent field, because I had the privilege of watching most of them. And because of that, and because of all the lectures I've heard, I really can't deny the good intentions that are just obvious and visible in LRH that kind of balances out some of the insanity that you can observe in other places and times in the development of the Sea Org. He really meant to help people and to teach people how to help people. And some of the stuff in those tech films is just awesome. How to handle psychosis, how to really grant beingness in session, some things that you just don't learn anywhere else.
Are they available at all on the internet?
No, unfortunately, none of them have been leaked successfully that I know. I think parts of the original orientation film, but that doesn't really count because it's not a tech film, and it was redone by Miscavige, and it follows an LRH script for the most part, but it's not a tech film. It doesn't make the point I want to make. In fact, a lot of people laugh at orientation, and rightly so, because there's some extreme things in there, but I'm talking about the tech films that train auditors. They're pretty awesome to watch. And some of them are funny. LRH had a really interesting sense of humor. And It was really tongue-in-cheek. It was really like, some of it was silly humor. And the thing is, you could tell LRH knew it was kind of, silly pun humor, but it was still fun, and he did it in the spirit of play. And if you watch those films with that attitude, they're really fun to watch because he's always got this, he's always inserting these humorous things or jokes or puns in his tech films, and he keeps it fun. So they're not only loaded with tech data, but they're really kind of fun to watch, even if they're not the best films and, they're not Hollywood productions, but, they're pretty cool. They're pretty good. I wish we could have
I know, I want to see him. So what was it like working as the Director of Special Affairs at a celebrity center?
Oddly enough, I had a lot of autonomy. I had seniors who were in the Sea Org. Nobody in the local org could really order me around. But I didn't abuse that privilege. I tried to coordinate with the executive director. I considered myself, the protector or the guardian of the org. That old concept of the guardian's office was actually a pretty apt term. And my job, I felt, was to protect the delivery of Scientology in my area and to keep, suppressives away from the org and off their lines. And I feel like I did a great job at that, and I'm very proud of that job. And I worked really hard at it. I had to teach school, and then I had to run to the org, put in 4 or 5 hours after a 8 or 9 hour teaching day every day. And I maybe got a weekend day off to visit with my daughter, and sometimes a little bit of auditing, which was great. That's how I went clear. And would put in a full weekend day. One of the days was for me and one was for the org. And so I had a pretty grueling schedule. I worked really hard. And I basically, reported things to my seniors, but I pretty much set my agenda. And I did what I sometimes got orders, but I didn't always follow them. If I didn't agree with them, I would find a way to get done what needed to be done without doing something crazy or something that I felt was possibly harmful to somebody. The old thing about how you're told to handle this person and you're told to be rough with them, and you go and you actually figure out a way to handle it with ARC. Because let's face it, when you're dealing with heavy situations, a lot of times you get orders to be mean. And sometimes you decide there's ways to do it that aren't as damaging as what you were told to do. So, but all in all, I can say I got a lot of experience working with, handling suppression, forwarding the social programs, which some of them are, let's face it, they get criticized by the anti-Scientologists as being front groups, but they're doing social good. And, CCHR especially is unlike, there's really not much equivalence in the non-Scientology world doing, there are some groups, but CCHR was very effective at challenging psychiatry and criminal psychiatry in particular, and I'm really proud to have worked in that area. So all in all, it was a good experience, but it was grueling, it was tough. I got yelled at, it wasn't always fun. It was a lot of responsibility, and sometimes you're the guy who's, you can't please everybody, and somebody... you have to make tough decisions on that post. And, I've gone back and apologized to people where I could, and explained to them what I was doing and why I did what I was doing. And I have a lot of friends now. One of them, I have a guy that I declared SP while I was DSA, and we're friends, and I audited him a few months ago. So, for free, I gave him a free session. So, I try to mitigate if I don't feel like it did a whole lot of damage or overts, but where I did, I try to mitigate that or make up for the damages and make things right, especially if I can audit somebody that, and help alleviate some of the charge.
Well, what sort of things did you do on a normal day, for example?
That's a good question, because one of the things I loved about the Post is there was so much variety. Of course, emergencies were always a priority. Sometimes I would be asked to help Sea Org missions or Sea Org people who came in for a certain purpose, pick them up at the airport or something. And so I was kind of pulled off post, but I was kind of a management terminal trusted to do those kinds of things. I'm not proud of the fact that I would pick up somebody and he'd go find somebody at the bus station who had blown from Int Base, and here he comes back with us to the airport. In some cases, after finding out what happened at Int Base, I kind of wish they'd have blown. But in that moment, I felt like I was helping the Sea Org and it seems like the guy wanted to go back, and he had the free will of getting back on the Greyhound bus and blowing. But apparently, he was a young man who didn't really know life outside Scientology, so he had his doubts or second thoughts about leaving Int Base, so he went back. So I hope he's okay. It's one of those things that you look at when you're trying to go to sleep at night, and you're going, "Gosh, I hope that guy made it okay," because But
can I say something rude though? So I just thought something rude would be interesting to say.
Yeah.
Some people might do really interesting things with their life, and some other people, they sort of don't. And so some people, they could leave the Sea Org, and it's like, well, if they left the Sea Org, they're probably just going to live an average sort of existence and maybe be like a slave to the banker, paying off a long mortgage and just working a simple job. Like, they're not really going to be doing something amazing with their life. But then there's other people who, if they're free from the Sea Org, then they might really do some amazing, interesting things with their life. So it's just kind of interesting, because sometimes you might see someone, like you're saying, who's at the bus stop, and they might continue on with the Sea Org, and if they didn't, it kind of doesn't really matter that much. Like, they're probably not really going to do anything with their life anyway. Like, I know it sounds rude, but like, they're not really going to achieve greatness. It's not like you're letting Nikola Tesla out, or you're letting L. Ron Hubbard out to go and really do something interesting, because there are a lot of people on Earth who, I don't know, they already are sort of a slave just being on Earth free anyway. You know what I mean? They're in some sort of prison of their own choosing, and they choose to just work the same job, and they put themselves into a little cage, right? And it is bigger than being in the Sea Org. Yes, the cage is a bit bigger, but it's still another cage. So it's just like, go to any cage. Who cares?
Yeah, I track with you totally on that. And this kid went back on his own free will. What was kind of sad was he was so young and so frightened of the outside world. You could tell, and he really didn't know what he was doing. So, maybe he got out some other way. They're not held against their will, but it is difficult, because it is, as Alex Gibney says, as much as I disagree with a lot of things he did, he called it a prison of belief, and in a sense it is. If you're not exposed or allowed to integrate or, your thinking with other perspectives, it becomes a prison of belief and you get trapped. And one of the things I wanted to say about, if someone did their time in the Sea Org, I respect that. As much as Scientology is being ripped apart now and exposed for the cult it is, and it is a cult, Scientology is a movement as well that doesn't have to be a cult, and I respect their contributions. So these guys that are out there in whatever state they're in, I respect what they did. I don't hate them for having been, aided Miscavige by serving in the Sea Org or aided Scientology. My attitude is of one of respect, no matter what the circumstances were, because it's a very difficult thing to do, and they dedicated their lives to a purpose, and, I'm sorry that it didn't work out. I always am. I'm sorry it didn't work out for me, but we all learned a really valuable lesson, and I think there's a lot of good things that we can take from it, and there are certain people that, I won't mention right now that are talking about that in present time, but and getting a bad time for it. But the fact is that Scientology has some unique strengths and assets and helpful data and techniques, and it takes people sometimes a while to destimulate from all they went through, and they didn't get, as you know, the kind of Scientology that they should have, the ideal scene where, you're auditing the person and doing for him, helping him improve his life. And, then he's going to stay in the Sea Org. He's going to stay on staff because he's getting something out of it as an exchange and not by some prison of belief, which is tragic. But that's the way life is. And you're right. There are plenty other examples on planet Earth of abusive traps, and we can look all around us. We don't have to keep fixated on Scientology for that. There's plenty of other cults and prisons and traps on this planet, and Scientology is unique in that it has some hope of reducing the trap and increasing freedom if it's done correctly, but it's got to be done right and intelligently with judgment, and with good intention.
Well, let's look at the Sea Org example. So let's say you're in the cage of the Sea Org. That's a smaller cage than the cage of a normal societal member. But the thing is, in that cage in the Sea Org, you get told, hey, there's more going on in life. You can do stuff with your mind. Hey, you actually reincarnate. Like, you come back again. That's huge data. For me, that is life-changing data. When you look into it, you investigate, and you find out it's true, that changes. It's a big game changer. That's what I'm saying.
Sure.
It's big.
Sure.
It's a big game changer. So it's almost like you're in a less of a cage by having that information, if you know what I mean. If you're in the Sea Org and you got that information, your cage might be physically smaller, but it's kind of like you're in a less of a cage by having that big information. But if someone really believes in themselves, like someone like me, I could never have got really trapped in the Sea Org. Like, I could have maybe done 3 years or something, but because if you really believe in yourself and you really believe you have a purpose and you have some sort of mission or something to do, when you're sitting at that bus stop about to leave, you end up choosing the option to leave because you're like, no, I have to do this. You know what I mean? Whereas if you're someone who doesn't really have, and I don't mean to put down the average human being, I don't feel like the average human being has a direct, important goal to their life that they're aware of, that they're actually operating on, like their basic purpose. And so they can be at the bus stop and they won't leave the bus stop because they don't have a direct thing to do. So they're like, oh, okay, I'll go back in the Sea Org, if you know what I mean. Or like, so they're sort of like having a purposelessness existence. But if you're a Thetan that really knows what's going on and really has a purpose, then you are likely to leave the Sea Org. And I don't think the Sea Org is actually for a Thetan like that, because they just can't get along with the whole communist idea of being in a group where you're controlled and you need to follow orders. They can do it for a little bit as a learning experience and to contribute a few years, but long term, it's not for them. But some other Thetans, it seems like they almost are like these beings that are group beings. Their big dynamic is their third dynamic.
Sure.
And the
Sure.
Sea Org suits them well, and they can probably have happiness, and it's their game. It's them to be in the Sea Org. But for other people, it's just like, it's not their thing.
No, that's a great summary. I can agree with that. And to answer your question, it might be better to tell you about a typical week instead of a typical day. A typical week, I would handle some suppression, do some investigation. I might make sure that people are signing their legal forms, which I'm incidentally not too proud of because they're very draconian, but they're signing their rights away. But that was my job. And I might call a media, like a magazine or a local newspaper, and either submit an article or complain that Scientology was kind of shown in a bad light, and could we correct that next time, or a retraction. And oftentimes I would get that, or maybe do a little interview on a local radio station once in a blue moon, which was very successful, and maybe have a CCHR meeting and coordinate with some of the other management of the local organization, coordinate with the local OT committee, getting some of their volunteers, see what they're doing with the social reform programs. So a lot of variety, basically solving problems, which I have always liked doing. And they were always the biggest, toughest problems landed on the DSA. There was a saying from the tech, or from the OEC volume, which is the management technology, that the executive director is not supposed to be Flapp's Crossroads, which means they're not supposed to be managing all the crap that comes in, from everywhere. But we had a running joke, and it was true. The DSA was Flapp's Crossroads. In other words, give it to the DSA if it was an unmanageable problem. And I actually wound up handling creditors, that the treasurer or the FBO, the flag banking officer, could not handle. I'd actually wind up calling them and making deals to settle situations that were adverse to the church and were unfair because we were sold something or we weren't delivered and we got ripped off. And I would actually aggressively handle those until we had no debts left. Before I left for Costa Rica, our org had the mortgage paid and debt-free. It was the only org on the planet that could say that. And I played a big role in that. I was working with the OT committee. So I wore, besides doing my hat of protecting the org, I was very proud of taking leadership in managing difficult situations.
Now, hold on. Why is there all these orgs that are in debt? Because isn't that against LRH's finance policies?
Yes, but orgs would usually pay rent, and if you look in LRH's org policies, he expected orgs to pay rent. We had the good fortune of buying our building and then paying it off. So we actually became debt-free and we owned the building. That was not typical of Scientology. So it was very unique to the Scientology world to have done that.
But so, because I noticed in Melbourne org, it seems like they were in a bit of debt and this was after the Ideal org had opened up. I imagine it was because of electricity bills and those, the running of an organisation bills that you get. Not like as in debt for the mortgage, because I assume they already own everything. But what's the deal with that? Why is it? Is it just because they're not making enough GIs that they're not covering their bills?
This comes down to Miscavige's Ideal Org program. Dallas was doing fine until he got in our business and forced us to move to a quote-unquote upstat, meaning high rent, rich part of town, where we bought a building, Ideal Org. Management owns it, and we have to pay management. And I say we, meaning Dallas. I'm not part of that anymore. I'm long gone from staff. But know that they are in debt up to their eyeballs. They're barely paying their staff. They're barely making it, and they've got the most posh uniforms and premises. And that's the whole problem with the ideal org thing. It makes David Miscavige the landlord who's collecting rent, and he doesn't always get it. But if the org can afford the rent, they send it up lines to management, and it goes to David Miscavige's coffers, and it becomes management funds. So, the whole ideal org program just ruined. Dallas was taking the lead. Other orgs would have followed suit, I think, and they could have paid off their buildings and stuff like that. But the ideal org just went crazy. And, the people have written about that in other places. I won't go into it here. But it's just, it wasn't following LRH policy. He didn't say to do that.
But the local orgs, they're not actually taking out loans to pay off their bills, are they? Or they're just accumulating they're accumulating a lot of debtors and they're struggling to pay them off, and they're just paying off bit by bit.
Here's what happens that I understand. The ideal orgs, like for example in Dallas, if they don't pay their water bill, they get their water shut off and they can't water the grass, and it's supposed to look like a golf course because it's in the most ritzy part of Dallas where they have golf courses all over and big, huge platinum buildings. So if the org can't pay its water bill, management pays it because there'll be big flats. So management pays the rent or the bills when the org can't. And what they do is they send in their Sea Org teams to keep, hounding the staff and regging for money so that they can support themselves, quote unquote. But, it's an endless present time problem for everybody. And it's no way to live. We were so happy when we got our bills paid. We could actually focus on training people and auditing people. That's what an org is for. Before that, we were embroiled in problems of paying the rent. And that's typical org, and that's what the ideal orgs have the orgs doing, just embroiled in problems paying the bills.
So basically, every week you're just obsessed with trying to get a GI in, and you can't focus on actually helping people and spreading the tech because this week you need to get the bill paid. You need to get, what sort of GI do you need to get?
Lord only knows. I think $10,000 a week for Dallas in order to pay all its bills in its building. And, when that happens, people stop delivering Scientology. When the focus is on gross income, delivery suffers. And that's where you get the collapse of people that don't get what they came for in Scientology, because delivery is not emphasized and taken care of with the same degree of intention and attention as getting gross income. And that's been a long-running problem with Scientology. And we've got to, if we're going to go forward with a correct and helpful Scientology, we've really got to balance the budget and keep people's focus on delivery. Whether you're a lone auditor or a three-man team out in the independent field, or a small org, or a Ron's org, or a Scientology org, the same thing applies. You've got to deliver, and you've got to do it within your means, and you've got to make it go right, without, there's even a policy LRH had about extravagance being a symptom of out ethics. And the Ideal Org program is extravagance above delivery, and that's a very, very bad indicator. Just that right there is that. In fact, I spotted that back in the day. I didn't know quite what was wrong with the Ideal Orgs, but I realized that it was extravagant and that the indicator was not good it's not a good reflection on management. So I went down to Costa Rica and got into several more years of staff down there and found out they were going to do the same thing there. So
have they made it into Ideal Org there as well now?
That's actually why I signed up. I thought I was going to help put an ideal org there, and it was going to service a big area. And to my knowledge, to this day, there's still not an ideal org there. Yeah. And I did a lot of work, a lot of late nights to do all the submissions to management. And the submissions were, totally finished, and a lot of hard work into that, late nights, sleepless nights. And then they released the Golden Age of Knowledge books, and that thing sits on the shelf collecting dust. And to this day, we still don't have an ideal org in Costa Rica.
Yeah. It's like that they take this idea that's like, you're great and your abilities are more than what you think, but then they just pervert it by saying, okay, now you have to do this, and they just make you just do all this stuff and all this extra stuff, and it just perverts the good idea. Because there are parents out there who like the low-tone ones, who treat their kids sort of badly and don't expect much from their kids, and probably put them on psych drugs or whatever. And that's not good. But then you can have a parent that says, I want my kid to be the best tennis player ever, and I expect him to do blah, 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 and give him this huge target and make him work to the bone. And at the end of the day, he ends up burning out and collapsing, and you get the same thing where you get a person who's messed up. So it's just like, it's just a classic trait of low-tone people and SPs to take like a good idea and they just pervert them and screw them up. And that's sort of what they're doing with the staff members. And anyway, but with the ideal org, they're just not advertising. I just don't think they're genuinely taking the whole Div 6 thing seriously, No,
and it tells you there's some real problem back there in management, as we know from all the reports on Miscavige. But for example, there aren't books in the stores. LRH said books are dissemination. People read a book and then they demand service. Yeah. There's no books in the stores.
Yeah, well, Scott, here's the thing, though. I don't think it is a problem. I think that's how it's being run, and that's how they want it run, whoever's actually in charge of it and running it. I don't think it, I think there's a reason why you don't get Battlefield Earth, the new release of it, being in bookstores, and that they just, you can actually see them not advertise Div 6 at the orgs. I remember being at the Melbourne org and noticing that they would pull people from Div 6 and actually set up these Div 2 regs, and it was just silly to watch, because it was just designed, the whole of the church, it seems like since the 80s, is designed to milk as much from the current public, and that's it.
Yeah, that's true. And despite the fact that I have disagreements with, LRH's tone and message and keeping Scientology working, number one, there's so many gems of wisdom in that policy letter. One of them is that we get attacked when we don't deliver. And, delivery has to be first. You can't say that enough. That's the only ethical approach to doing Scientology, whether you're an independent field auditor, a small group, or a church. You have to deliver, and the money will follow, because you deliver and you take care of your staff and you get them co-auditing and auditing. The aberration starts to fall away, the havingness goes up, then you start having the money, then you can do your renovations on a gradient, and you're going to wind up with an awesome org, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. But you have to deliver first. Yeah. You have to have the correct technology. You have to know what you're doing and evaluate. And you have to be honest, and you have to really be helping the person in front of you. That's where it all happens.
Yeah, that's what's great about Scientology, like the auditing tech and the admin tech and stuff, is that you learn ideas that you can then transfer to your own life. So this idea of delivering a good product, you apply it to your own life, whatever your job is. You don't worry about money, you worry about delivering a good product, and then people will want to employ you and all that sorts of stuff. You know what I mean? It's your attitude. You got to have that idea in, and then you'll get attention and you'll get people wanting to work for you. And it's just a really important thing, because I think a lot of people will be worried about the money, and the truth is, when you're starting out on something, it's hard to make money, and just don't worry about the money. Like, it's a second. Like, I think money's so important. It's a really big thing, but you have to make it number 2 in importance. You have to make number 1 delivering a good product and stuff.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out something and validate what you're doing, because I can see that in you. You're not making money off this. You're investing your time and energy because you love what you're doing. You love to get the word out about interview people. Someday maybe it'll convert or something will happen that will be lucrative for you. But meanwhile, you're approaching this as a professional. You're doing the best job you can. And it's really appreciated, by the way, because I know you're not making money off this, but it's a valuable service, and you're out there, and I hope that, it comes back to you. But, I do a lot of those things myself. There's a lot of things I do because I feel like it's the right thing to do. And that's along the same lines of delivering, and then the money will come in.
Yeah, well, it's possible one day that Scientology could increase in popularity, and it could get many, many thousands of views and that sort of stuff. I guess that's the goal of it. But anyway, yeah, I'm just not doing it for the money, because I've done that. I've done things before for the money. I've sold myself out before, and the end result is just like depression. Really, you just feel shit. You're just a slave, and I'm not going to put up with that sort of crap. Like, it's money's awesome. I want to get rich. I want to have heaps of it. But what's better is enjoying what you're doing and wanting to contribute something good. And I think that's the big thing, especially in this world where I can see that there's lots of scams. There's lots of people just being obsessed with money. There's lots of crap going on. There's not many people or things out there that are just like, you know what? I'm not going to care about money. I'm actually just going to try and do a good job. And I think knowing that, I think it means you can really stand out from the crowd. I think it's really good because not many other people are doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's very beneficial, Yeah.
It's the true meaning of leadership and following higher purposes. I mean, there's no substitute for that. You don't get that with no matter how much money you have, and you can talk to rich people. If you're following higher purposes, for example, me, I'm not a high-class auditor, so I don't have as many clients as a lot of the other indie auditors who have Grad 5 training, certificates on the wall. I still do Grad 5 actions because I've done my study and my co-auditing, and I know how to do them, and I do them well. And I deliver a good product, and that's why I stay in business, as it were, or, I get what I need. And I put in a lot of time on things that don't pay, but because they keep my purpose on fire, and I do what I love doing, auditing people and helping people, the money does come in. I get taken care of, and I don't have to worry about it. And that's a really nice thing, not to be... we call it PTP'd or problemed, with how am I going to pay the bills next month? It's nice to be able to, the more you follow your purpose, the more the universe kind of surrenders, as we were talking about earlier. Right. The universe surrenders to purpose and makes it more possible for you to have more time to put into it. And it's really a wonderful thing. It's highly recommended. It's not something there's a special process or rundown for, although that helps. But when you get on your purpose, there's no substitute.
Well, and you can just look at it from the point of view. I can look at the point of view before I got into Scientology and I was lower toned. What was important? It was money, yeah, and it was just doing things for the money. And if you look at SPs, what they do is they deliver no product or a bad product, and they try and get as much money as they can. So just flip it and just do the opposite, exchange in abundance, and that's how you do it. So you mentioned before, you mentioned the OT community before, which I found interesting. I kind of noticed that they didn't seem to do much. They just seemed to sit around drinking tea and eating cakes all the time or something. What do you notice? What do you in the churches and that? What do these OT committees do?
Well, it's been a long time because I've been out of the church for 10 years now. No, I'm sorry, not that long, but still a long time, 8 years. And OT committees were a social group, but they also had, coordinated, at least in Dallas and in Costa Rica, they would meet and share what they were doing, what was successful. For example, in Costa Rica, they were passing out a lot of Way to Happiness. There was a CCHR that was just getting underway, and they were contacting opinion leaders in the mental health profession and sharing literature. A lot of exciting things go on. So it's a place where people are really being OT, because it's actually, OT is more of a doingness than anything, and actually getting products and getting things done and encouraging each other and sharing. And that's the ideal scene. I can't say every org was doing it that way, but that's what I've seen that was successful. Of course, management wants them to report stats, statistics, and that kind of put a damper on things because, it's not always appropriate. But still, overall, it was local and in their control. Management wasn't getting into their business. And, when that, people almost always, Scientologists are really good at taking initiative. And if you back off and let them do their thing, like my seniors did with me as a DSA, they'll get their job done and they'll take pride in their own competence. And it's a beauty to see. There's not an authoritarian line of authority going. It's just people doing things because it feels good and because they know they're helping. So I've seen OT committees doing good things and with a lot of morale, which means they're producing. Morale is based on production.
Yeah.
And by that I don't mean just production under the whip, but production you generate yourself and you go out and you get something done. Then you feel good about it. And that was a high esprit de corps, a spirit of operation. It was really nice to see. So I take it that, a lot of other orgs did the same thing, because OT committees had, they weren't orgs, they had a little more freedom. They weren't staff, they weren't under contract. Flag is kicking them in the butt to get something done because they have to get OT eligibility. But some people were just doing it, because they loved doing it and because they knew they were helping.
Yeah, and so you don't actually have to be an OT on the OT levels to be part of the committee, do you?
No, and that's a good point. That's why underscored the doingness. If you're getting things done in the physical universe, you're that degree OT.
Yeah.
Said.
Hey, with the training that you did in the Office of Special Affairs, how was it? Like, what sort of stuff did you get out of it? And was any of it actually stuff that's written by like the CIA or anything?
I'll answer that question right away first. I leaked the OSA documents pack, and we talked about that last show, and it's on my site, the leak of the OSA network documents. That's basically what was my full hat, what I studied. It's very similar to certain sections of intelligence world. LRH's naval intelligence, and he learned that there, and he incorporated what he knew and into that. The CIA has the same functions in society as the DSA, only it's sort of the dark side. You know what I mean? They're doing PR, but it's propaganda. They're controlling people's opinions. They're doing legal stuff, but it's persecuting
right-wingers.
They're doing social reform in reverse. They're doing, they're putting out Hollywood movies that are lowering morals and ethics in society and music. And they're putting out false media stories because they're all over the media, which is, again, that's the PR area. So they're using the same technology in reverse.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to have that information, which is why I leaked the pack. If you want to know how a group is managed and protected in a good way, you read those. And if you want to know what's going on in the world and how you're being managed as a slave, you read that pack and you apply it in reverse, or you apply it to a different line of thinking, then you'll know how it's being done. So LRH had the map, and he shared it with us in those references. It was designed to be only for the Guardian's office, but it's really powerful stuff to have at your fingertips. A lot of it is in the management volumes in some degree or another, but there's a few gems in there that aren't found anywhere else.
Is the CIA doing this intelligence stuff in order to help set up a communistic type government or something?
That is my conclusion after studying the hierarchy on this planet. Seems to be the British royal family and the Vatican at the very top, because of all the resources. They own so much land, it's mind-boggling. I mean, literally trillions and trillions of dollars in land. And they are ultimately the masters, or the slave masters, as well as your old banking families. And so at the second layer, you've got the bankers, the intelligence agencies, and the major media, and that, and your secret societies, and those are running kind of middle management for the slave masters, and they are themselves slave masters. And that layer is literally above government. People think that the government tells the CIA what to do. It's the reverse. The CIA tells the government what to do.
Yeah.
And there's, I could point you to many books and articles and stuff, and it's about connecting the dots, because they're never going to tell you that or admit that. You have to connect those dots. And so you realize that the government isn't as powerful as we think. It's used for suppressive ways. It's manipulated. But really the media and the banks control the finance and the information. And when you control money and information, you manage the people underneath. You control how corporations develop and their culture, even their culture in it. You control the religions and what they can and can't do. So it's fascinating. But to answer your question, the CIA is, or remind me of what the question is so I can make sure.
Well, I'm trying to say, I think it's basically, what's the end game of all this?
Oh yeah. We were talking about, having different governments is a nuisance to them. They want one government where they can control the whole planet, and basically we can be their slave force, which we already are kind of partially, if you look at how they're milking the inflation, the taxes, and financial instruments, which they are fake, or that they can actually extract wealth and labor from the citizens of or the people of Earth. Now, it'd be so much better for them if they had it under one government and they could control the whole thing. And then they could go in and they wouldn't have competition. They wouldn't have, nation states that opted out of their world system and became, rogue, and people that had independence and freedoms and rights. So it's a very important end game. Mankind is literally fighting for their life, and has been for centuries, or maybe even millennia, just trying to become worthy of its freedom and a free people,
So what these SPs want to do is they basically want to make everyone into slaves and live the high life live off the benefits of having all these people that are their slave, basically.
Yeah, in order to do that, they can do it covertly or overtly. But in order to do that, they're managing the three big mechanisms: religion, media, and finance. And that's their trinity of evil, and that's their control mechanisms for keeping people in line. And what we see going on with the CIA and agents in the field and things like that is basically operations to keep us confused, fighting each other, controlled opposition.
Keep us dumb. Yep.
Keep us dumb, keep us controlled, keep us poisoned, toxic, and keep the corporations controlling the government and making money, extracting wealth. It comes down to the bottom line of extracting wealth because they can control any alternatives to, our own independence. They limit that sharply.
So the reason they might be attacking someone's YouTube channel who might be exposing truths about the world, like maybe a secret space program or how banking works or alternative health, the reason they might be attacking someone's channel like that is because they don't want people finding out about how the prison is run.
Yeah, ultimately they don't want people to learn what slaves they are.
Yeah.
Who was it? Goethe from Germany said there are none more enslaved than those who believe they are free.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So with the Office of Special Affairs training, what are the actual orders on squirrel groups? What did LRH say you're supposed to do with squirrel groups?
Actually, there's not that much in the DSA pack that isn't also in the OEC or the management volumes. If you look at a blue on white issue in one of the organization course division manuals, you'll find a text called Ampronistics, and it's one of the key squirrel handling policies about how you infiltrate and wipe out squirrel groups. It's not a secret policy. It's not an OSA only reference. It's actually, I think it's in the OEC vols. And, other issues, there are similar issues, but in the OSA pack, we were looking at the fourth dynamic, fighting SMERSH, which is the code name for Russian intelligence, who was the enemy of the day, fighting the World Federation of Mental Health, that kind of stuff. There wasn't a whole lot of attention on squirrel groups, even though that falls in the DSA's area. Most of the squirrel references were not secret. It's my point.
Well, so are you saying that LRH wanted the squirrel groups to get infiltrated and shut down?
Yeah, and he pretty much openly stated that in policy from 1955 and from 1965.
So,
and the ethics book really has the policy on that.
Not groups that are like some new agey group. You mean specific, like proper squirrel groups that are using Scientology tech without the copyright? Exactly.
People who left the church, like Jack Horner, who is the subject of Ampronistics, but that policy gets applied to any group that splinters off Scientology doing their own thing.
Well, I mean, okay, so from the church's point of view, you could say like Ronzorg or APIS are like sort of squirrel groups, but something like Landmark or Avatar, that's a bit different because that's more like new agey sort of self-help sort of thing, although there might be some Scientology information in it. Where do you draw the line?
That's a good point, and because of what you just stated, Landmark kind of moved down the priority. When I was DSA, I actually had to go and figure out whether Landmark materials still resembled Scientology, and I reported back what I found, and they just kind of, Landmark's not important anymore because it was so watered down. It wasn't, something that was competing with the church directly. So they would have their attention more on independent delivery because that competes with the church. And if you really look, and I hate to say this, but LRH was really trying to quash his competition with his policy. That's the bottom line. And create, which is a disagreement I have with him because it violates the warning he had in Philadelphia Doctorate Course number 20, do not make a monopoly out of Scientology or you're going to have trouble. And that's what the church has been trying to do.
I know. Yeah, it's very... Yeah. It is definitely something that I disagree with. Like, I mean, if LRH says screw all groups, people don't go to them because they deliver shit tech. You don't need to handle them. You don't need to attack them. But that's one of the first things I noticed when I got into Scientology. Like, my initial reaction was when I was looking at the admin thing inside of it, I was like, okay, these are some good ideas, but this isn't the genius of Scientology. It's the tech side that's a genius, or whatever. Because there always seems to be a lot more not quite right about the admin side of it. You know what I mean? And so it's like,
yeah. And
if you look at even if you look at Ronsorg, they're trying to have standard tech, but they're not really that keen on the admin side. They seem to, you know what I mean? The whole standard admin thing doesn't seem to really. It's hard to have standard admin when computers with emails get invented and things change. You know what I mean? But
that's a good point. Yeah,
it's a bit weird. That's all. I don't know.
So I still value the admin tech in the sense that it's got gems of wisdom in it that you can extract, and that are not found in the technical issues. So they're worth having around, but I agree with Ronsorg. It doesn't deserve much emphasis because there's been so many changes. And really, LOH stated right out, he said, purpose is senior to policy. You should be using the admin to accomplish your purpose, and when it doesn't serve, you should invent your own or adapt the technology to your situation and take that approach to admin. So I agree with their approach. Things have, just what you said, things have changed so much. You've just got to really think with it and extract the good gems out of it that are really worthwhile, and make your own org board that's functional, organizing board. Make an admin scale that follows the be-do have of what you want to get out of life and out of your product, and make that line up with everything. And that's most of it right there. You should have policy that helps people get along in an organization. Every organization has to have it, no matter what they are. But that can be done. And WISE groups used to do that. WISE used to get permission to adapt LRH policy to different situations where you couldn't interpret policy literally. You really had to adapt it radically to fit a different situation. It wasn't a Scientology org. It was maybe an auto sales, or something like that. It was very different. And times have changed, so admin has to change with it.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe Hubbard had the argument that, like, he didn't want people in the 60s starting up a different Scientology organization, doing a bad job of it, and then everyone says, oh, that Scientology thing's bad. It's kind of like you got a Ferrari and someone else is releasing Ferraris as well, and they release shit Ferraris that aren't fast, and you give the Ferrari brand a bad name. So I understand that idea and that workability of this idea of trying to stamp out squirrel groups. But anyway, it's a bit weird. I mean, now everything's changed because the whole name of Scientology and the reputation's gone down the toilet. So it's crap anyway. So it's just like, what does it matter? Like, it's about as low as you can get, the reputation of it. But yeah, there is something weird about, whether you're doing whatever it is you're doing, to think that you can just go out there and try and take out your competition. It's a bit awkward. Hey, with Landmark, what similarities did you see in Landmark towards Scientology?
I got to say, it was hard to find stuff in Landmark materials that I went over that were even like Scientology, other than some basic concepts like you could see kind of be, do, have, and
Well, don't they have secret levels?
I don't think so. No.
Well, how did you get? Did you try and get their higher level stuff, or how did you get their information?
No, I don't think they have secret levels. There are other groups that do, but Landmark, I think, just had like basic. It was a lot like basic courses, and it was based on their predecessor was Erhard Seminars training, which is like a kind of a boot camp Scientology weekend where you went and did hard TRs, and you had a personal instructor sometimes, and sometimes you had a group instructor, and you would do group stuff, and it was like a boot camp where you were gonna get through come hell or high water by the second day. Like you couldn't even go to the bathroom until you had your cognition. It was rough, but it was like they used necessity level to kind of enforce spiritual growth, and for some people it worked great, and for some it didn't. But in those days, it resembled hard TRs and drilling, and had some Scientology stuff in it. And then Landmark was really watered down and became more of a course study type stuff. And so it didn't really it wasn't competing with Scientology. It was self-help, and it wasn't bad from what I could see, but it was, like the other groups that you mentioned, Avatar and Ekankar, they've gone quite far afield from. They still have some of the philosophy and some of the basics concepts, but it's not. They're not doing auditing, for example, and things like that.
But with Landmark, though, some people pay thousands of dollars to do some courses with them. How the hell did you get your hands on? How do you have any idea what's in their advanced levels, or their ones that aren't just the basic course that they've got?
I think at my level, they wanted analysis of the basic materials. I think they probably sent some other high-level OSA operation to get, a look at the higher stuff, and paid the $1,000. I wasn't involved in that part. I just got a little sub program of that whole bigger program, and my analysis was that at the lower levels there was no, it wasn't really Scientology anymore.
Yeah, because I've heard with like Landmark and Avatar, apparently in their higher levels that there is some sort of data that resembles like OT3 or something like that.
That could be.
Yeah. So except they don't use the same language, but it's the same ideas expressed in a different sort of way. Which is interesting because it kind of makes you validate the Scientology tech, because you got these other people who don't even know about Scientology, but they're doing these other practices and they're believing it and it's successful and they're liking it, and so it's just interesting, it makes you think it's all true. But I think we're coming towards the end of the interview. Are you okay with doing a part 3?
Oh, sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Because
we have lots to talk about. Yeah.
Well, because I didn't want to do this, but I thought it might happen where there's just because I want to go into the whole anti-Scientology community, anti-Scientology cult thing, and I have a bunch of questions on that, and there isn't enough time for it, so I think a part 3 would be best. And I can also ask you about your free Scientology project, but can you quickly say what that's about now?
Yeah, Free Scientology Project is basically taking the best of LRH tech. Really, there's very little or no tweaking or changing the grades. It's just reevaluating it so that it's delivered on a smoother gradient and that incorporates things that might be seen as missing holes. For example, on grade 3, there's not a whole lot of ARC brake processes. So there are some other things that I pulled, oddly enough, from LRH, from other areas, to make a more full or complete grade 3. So that's part of the Free Scientology work on the grades. Of course, we're trying to get back to the principle of self-determinism being the highest, his self-determinism is the highest Q, and it also is the guiding principle for free Scientology, so that things like that are done for the org, like sect checks and things like that, it doesn't mean you never do a sect check. It means that you do it, on, say, around grade 4 as an false purpose rundown on an area of aberration that a person really wants to handle. And we're not interested in making a group powerful. We're interested in presenting information that can help anybody improve themselves. Where we can find valuable solo techniques for the person who doesn't have the option of an auditor, we want to provide that. We also want to encourage co-auditing and training, because that's the best way to do the bridge. It's the most economical way, and it's how you make people, go up the bridge with balance, so that by the time they get to the higher levels, they're actually auditors and can audit themselves successfully. And that was, I think, what was successful about Scientology in the past. Where it had its golden age in the 70s. You had a lot of missions with lots of co-audits.
Yeah.
So, free Scientology is basically an intelligent reevaluation of everything about it, taking away the things that rob an individual of self-determinism, and they're not many, but, depending on how you handle sect checking, that can be a factor. And one example of several, just reevaluating things so that the auditor is handling, for example, service facsimiles as they come up and not saving them for some future date on grade 4, or handling an evil purpose when it comes up and not waiting for some highly trained expanded Dianetics auditor. Not that you wouldn't do that as well, but that you just destimulate these things as they come up using standard LRH service fac handling. So, and as well, we put the help rundown at the beginning of the bridge, where we started out our interview talking about life repair and getting people really their case level in this day and age. LRH had the help rundown for South Africa, because they were rough cases compared to the rest of the planet. And my observation is, maybe we should break out this rundown for not everybody, not that you have to enforce this on everybody, but offer it at the beginning of the bridge, because the South African rundown does not have the drug handling prerequisite. It can get somebody started on what becomes a life repair action. You can twin up people and do a co-audit on the help rundown, and it's very successful that way. So without going too far outside of the box, and keeping things in the box where they belong, we've been able to streamline, I think, the bridge. And then in the future, we're going to offer all of the options for a clear for the higher levels, so that people do not only the currently standardized Hubbard levels, but they also have other amazing breakthroughs by, old-time Dianetist Dennis Stevens and Jack Horner, some of his stuff, and just offer people things that are very empowering that they could be doing as clears. That's future work, and I myself need to get up some of these upper levels and the Hubbard levels so that I can evaluate this stuff better. But right now we're focused on training the lower bridge, making it as successful as possible, and fun to audit and easy to audit.
Cool. And so this is you and some other indies that are setting this up?
Yeah. I'm primarily the lead auditor in this, but I have some other people that are full-time auditors and supervisors, trained people that are contributing to the project as well. So I get to run these things by them and pilot some of the things that we're doing. So that's really exciting. It's fun to have that kind of teamwork going.
Yeah, good. I wish you luck in it. And I'm looking forward to part 3, talking to you again. All right, thanks for that, Scott Gordon.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for the interview and the opportunity to share and exchange viewpoints and ideas. And I'm looking forward to more. So thanks.
All right, see ya. Bye. Yes, so that was the interview with Scott Gordon. I hope you liked it. And I think I'll be doing another interview with him where we'll be diving into the whole anti-Scientology people and really present time issues as what's going on with the Scientology haters, the ASC people, anti-Scientology cult people. Now, before we end off the podcast, we've got an LRH quote, an L. Ron Hubbard quote, and this is a good one. This is very, very good. Okay. The person himself carries along the restimulative factors which set commotions into action in his vicinity. An individual carries with him the turbulence which restimulates others and causes them to react against him. That's from Tone 40 on an object. Okay, so I've got to elaborate on that because I've totally noticed that in my life. And so basically, have you ever noticed that someone always seems to have bad luck? Well, that's because within their mind, they've got junk in their mind and they walk around and this junk causes reality in their environment, things to happen. And obviously, if they're having lots of accidents, then it's causing crap to happen in their environment, basically. I mean, the accident thing can also be a PTS thing, but that's a whole other topic. But, well, let's just say someone always gets into arguments with people or notices that people are always angry with him, right? Because in their mind, they've got junk and they're walking around with this junk and it causes a reality in their environment, causes people to be angry because they're junk in their mind. So they can walk down the street and not yell at anyone, look perfectly normal, be perfectly respectful, and they will find that people can start yelling at them and getting angry at them. And then they walk around and then they have people yell at them throughout the day and they come home and they go, honey, fuck, people are pricks. They're always so angry and mean to me and shit. And it's like, that's because you've got that crap in your mind and it's restimulating people in your environment. It's setting the environment into action. I really notice this with people because, for example, if I was just keyed in, right, let's say I didn't sleep well, and I also wear crystals and stuff because I find that they bring me uptone or they stop bad shit from happening in my environment. And so I think they key me out. Literally, I think just wearing crystals around me keeps my energy high and keeps my bank away from me and stuff. It literally has an effect on me. It's really interesting. This crystal called Carmelian. It's just amazing. It changed me forever. So when I don't have the crystal on and when I skip food and when I like when I just start getting keyed in, you know what it's like, keyed in, like feel bad and stuff. And when I don't try and avoid bad people or whatever, and I just let all this, like, I just let myself get keyed in, I can walk around and literally not do anything and people will like, I guess argue with me or something like that, or like be nasty to me. And why is that the case? That's because I haven't done enough auditing because I've still got junk in my mind that's creating that person being angry at me. This isn't shit that's Hubbard making this up. I've full on seen evidence to back up this quote that he's saying. It really does seem to exist. It's an amazing thing. Like, I'm trying to think of another example. Like, for example, I noticed this when I was getting audited. Like, I'll get audited on a specific topic, and let's say it's something like problems with other people or whatever. And after it, suddenly after I'd been audited, right, people in my environment, my behavior wouldn't change, but their behavior would change. So let's say you've got like an angry stepdad or something that's a problem for you and stuff. Well, you get audited, right? Let's say on that stepdad or on the topic of angry people. And after that, you're like, oh, great. I'm not going to be as upset about angry people. Good. Because I'm cool with angry people. I can handle it now or whatever. And then you get around one of these angry people and they're no longer angry. And you're like, whoa, why the hell did I get audited? I didn't even have to do that. That person's not angry anymore. And then you find out that person's not angry anymore because you handled that junk in your mind. It's like remote auditing. It's like remote influencing. And this is how I think planetary clearing is possible, because you get enough people getting out the junk out of their mind and other people will start going clear. And this is what's good about you improving. This is what's really important about you improving your own personal case, because you wake up to the matrix world that we're living in. You wake up to the truth. You have all these cognitions and awarenesses, and you'll find that other people will start having them too, and they'll start getting keyed out. So you can help the whole planet Earth. You can help other people in your environment, help key everyone else out. Like, let's say you're aware that banking's corrupt and that it's dodgy and stuff, and you're annoyed that other people aren't smart enough to see it, right? Well, what's good is that by you getting audited and you becoming aware of that, you'll find more people will start becoming aware of it just because you are. Because somehow all our minds are sort of connected in some sort of spiritual way. Like, you can't see it. Like, there seems to be, our minds seem to be separate, but it seems to be that actually our minds are sort of connected. And so you're looking at someone else and you're sort of looking at a part of yourself when you're looking at someone else. So if you've got problems with people in your environment, handle yourself. Don't think you have to talk to that person or even like argue with them or get away from it. It's even possible that if you just handle yourself, you get rid of that junk in your mind. That means you've gotten rid of junk in their mind just by getting rid of junk in your mind. It's really interesting. It's true. It's just really true, this quote. I'll read it again. The person himself carries along the stimulative factors which set commotions into action in his vicinity. An individual carries with him the turbulence which stimulates others and causes them to react against him. Amazing. So that's it for the podcast. It's time for you to climb back out of the rabbit hole, out of this funky Scientology world. If you like this adventure, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and check out Andy Nolch's YouTube channel for some of my interesting things where I talk about Scientology. I've been Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. Until next time, take care of yourself and climb up out of that bridge.